Hello, everybody. How do you do? Welcome to Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts, the podcast, the t-shirt, the home pregnancy tests, roach spray. Make sure you're not getting knocked up by roaches while you sleep. Ugh, that's fucking gross, dude. I'm your host. My name is Michael Lucht. And today, we're going to be going down, South America. The Triple Frontier, specifically. Talk about an ongoing case, actually. Something that is still taking place. It's kind of left the media landscape because, well, once the narrative shifted from quote-unquote aliens to quote-unquote gold miners, people stopped giving a shit. But something you should very much give at least one shit about. They were talking about the PELACARAS, the face peelers in Peru and the Triple Frontier area of, I believe it's Peru, Argentina, Paraguay. You're going to hear me put a lot of salsa and a lot of words today, so get ready for that. Before we dive into today's material, quick question for listeners out there, specifically anyone who does like YouTube content creation or video specifically. I am in the market for some video editing software, and I'm not sure where to go. So I want to ask my beautiful, intelligent, preternaturally gifted, mutant, shape-shifting, I don't know. I can't compliment you guys enough. You're great. I want to ask my intelligent audience, what's a good beginner software for video editing? I mostly just want to do like documentary style stuff. Basically, take this show and add a video component. So if anyone knows of a good, reasonably priced video editing software that is user-friendly, good for like a beginner, basically, let me know. Because I am looking to expand the business. Get all up in that business. Anywho, let's get into this PELACARAS business. The lore surrounding the PELACARAS, or face peelers, and their related figures is deeply embedded in the cultural and historical consciousness of Peru and the broader South American continent, representing a primal fear of the other, the quote-unquote other, that preys on human beings for their most vital components. The foundational myth is that of the pish taco, not to be confused with fish taco.
A fish taco?
A pish taco.
A terrifying figure from Andean folklore that dates back to the Spanish conquest. The pish taco, often depicted as a tall, gaunt white man, that's right, is a nocturnal predator who hunts indigenous people not for gold or land, for their body fat and organs. Go check out my previous episode on medicinal cannibalism for more of a deep dive on this subject, as well as a few more notable cases of this fat extraction, quote-unquote, taking place. It's macabre stuff. This folklore emerged as a dark reflection of colonial anxieties, where the conquistadors' perceived greed and otherness were transformed into a literal monster that harvested human bodies. The fat was believed to be used for a variety of sinister purposes, from anointing church bells to fueling arcane machinery, or even as a cure for diseases, making the pish taco a symbol of exploitation, where a person's very essence is commodified and consumed by an external alien power. This legend established a powerful template for a humanoid predator that operates not on the margins of society, but right within it, all up in it, turning the human body into a resource to be extracted. The PELACARAS, or face peelers, are a modern and more visceral evolution of this foundational myth. While the pish taco steals fat, the PELACARAS steal identity itself, personified in the face. This legend, which has reportedly been told to children in the Peruvian Amazon for generations now, describes beings that surgically remove the facial skin of their victims with terrifying precision. The act of face peeling is a profound violation that goes beyond simple murder. It's an erasure of the person's social and individual existence. In a culture where the face is the primary signifier of the self, Its removal is the ultimate form of dehumanization, leaving behind an anonymous, unrecognizable corpse. This shift from stealing fat to stealing faces reflects a modern fear of psychological annihilation and the loss of self, updating the ancient global horror for a new era. The PELACARAS are the Pishtako's spiritual successor, representing a more intimate and technologically sophisticated form of predation. The lore of these predators is not confined to Peru, but extends into the broader Amazon basin, including the infamous Triple Frontier, where Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina meet. This vast lawless region is a melting pot of myths and legends where the fear of supernatural predators blends with the very real dangers posed by criminal organizations. In this context, the entities are often shapeshifters or spirits from the jungle, such as the Supé from the Quechua mythology, who are masters of illusion and deception. Illusions, Michael. The Supé is a demonic figure associated with the underworld and death, who can appear in various forms to lead people astray. This introduces the element of identity theft into the lore, as these entities are not just physical predators, but psychological ones who can mimic human form and voice to deceive their victims before the final violent act. This connects the physical act of face peeling to a deeper, more insidious form of identity theft, where the entity doesn't just take a face, but can potentially wear the victim's persona to gain trust and access to others. Now, I haven't found a lot of specific lore of these creatures or entities doing that, but it's definitely a possibility. I mean, it's kind of baked into the whole idea of stealing someone's face, essentially. Plus, magic, etc. The ultimate expression of this fear of identity theft in South American folklore can be found in the legend of, also, the Chupacabra, which, while originating in Puerto Rico, found a powerful home in the continent's popular imagination. The Chupacabra is a creature that drains the blood of livestock, leaving behind strange, surgically precise wounds and often completely exsanguinated bodies. While it doesn't steal faces, it operates on a similar principle of paranormal predation that leaves behind a complete mystery. More directly, the concept of an entity that perfectly mimics a human to infiltrate a community is a common trope in the region's folklore, often told as a cautionary tale about trusting strangers, especially those from outside of the community. These stories warn of imposter humans, duplicates or doppelgangers created by dark magic or demonic forces, who return to a village to cause chaos or to replace a loved one, leading to a deep-seated paranoia where anyone could be a monster in disguise. Anyone. This theme of the imposter, combined with the visceral horror of the Pishtako and the PELACARAS, creates a rich and terrifying tapestry of folklore where the greatest fear isn't just death, but the theft of one's physical and social identity by an inhuman predator. Perhaps the greatest embodiment of this particular fear of supernatural identity theft is represented by the Nagual or Nahual. But I've got a huge investigation/episodes, but it's going to be a series probably, planned around this particular entity, like in the works right now, so keep an ear out for that. But in the folklore and modern conspiracy narratives surrounding the PELACARAS, the occult technologies they possess are a chilling blend of ancient shamanic power and futuristic otherworldly hardware, blurring the line between magic and advanced science. The most prominent and consistent description of their technology is the personal flight apparatus, often referred to as flying pads or platforms attached to their feet. In fact, I believe one of the villagers interviewed, or more than one of the villagers interviewed about these flying, quote-unquote, aliens or, folkloric face peelers, they've multiple times been referred to as looking like the Green Goblin from the Spider-Man movies. Like, same technology and same armor, etc. Very close. So that's just kind of gives you a visual representation of what we're going with here. This allows them to move silently through the dense jungle canopy, hovering and descending upon their victims with an eerie supernatural grace. This isn't described as simple propulsion, but as a form of anti-gravity technology that defies conventional physics, representing a mastery over gravity itself that's perceived as a form of high-tech sorcery. This ability to appear and disappear at will Bypassing the physical obstacles that ground any human or terrestrial vehicle is their primary tactical advantage and the source of their mythic power. Another key piece of their technological arsenal is their advanced weaponry and protective gear. Eyewitnesses have described the PELACARAS as wearing impenetrable black body armor that can deflect shotgun blasts at close range, suggesting a material science far beyond human capabilities. This is often coupled with reports of energy-based weapons that can incapacitate or kill without making a sound or leaving a traditional wound. That's another thing. Like, most of the commercially available or non-classified information revolving around jetpacks and levitation platforms, etc., these things are very noisy. However, all of these accounts surrounding the PELACARAS say that these things make no noise. Some accounts speak of beams of light that paralyze victims or devices that emit a high-pitched frequency, a form of sonic weapon that induces extreme fear and disorientation. This combination of defensive and offensive technology, which operates on principles of energy and frequency rather than kinetic force, is seen as a form of occult warfare because its methods are mysterious and its effects are seemingly magical to those who experience them. Beyond physical hardware, the PELACARAS are also attributed with technologies that directly manipulate consciousness and biology. We're talking psychotronics type shit here. The most disturbing of these is the alleged use of chemical or aerosol agents to subdue victims. In one detailed encounter, a survivor, I believe this was a young girl, counted that the beings poured a liquid into her nose, rendering her unconscious and pliable to their will. This suggests a sophisticated understanding of human physiology and neurochemistry, a form of occult technology that attacks the mind rather than the body. This is often linked to the face peeling itself, which is described as being done with surgical precision, implying the use of advanced energy scalpels or laser-like tools that can cut flesh without causing excessive bleeding. Shades of cattle mutilation already appearing here. This fusion of chemical sedation and bloodless surgery points to a technology so advanced it appears as a form of dark magic, a violation of the human body that is both clinical and profoundly unnatural. Finally, the most esoteric occult technology attributed to these beings is their mastery over perception and reality itself. Drawing on the broader South American lore of shapeshifters like the Supay, the PELACARAS are sometimes said to possess the ability to create illusions or to appear in different forms. Some reports claim that they can mimic human voices, luring victims into traps or sowing confusion within a community. This is a form of psychic technology, a weapon of information and perception that is far more insidious than any physical device. In the context of the quote-unquote Stargate conspiracies, this ability is often explained as a function of their interdimensional nature. They're not just using technology to travel between points, but are manipulating the very fabric of reality to move between dimensions, making them masters of a science so advanced it's indistinguishable from the most powerful forms of sorcery. You know, Isaac Hayes, the sci-fi writer. We'll be delving more into the concept of stargates later in this episode. One of the most well-documented and terrifying encounters with alleged flying humanoids occurred in the early hours of January 16, 2004 in Guadalupe, Nuevo Leon, Mexico. At approximately 3:15 a.m., Officer Leonardo Samaniego was on routine patrol in his squad car when a large, dark object appeared to leap from a tree and plummet towards his vehicle. The being slammed onto the windshield, clinging to the glass and giving Samaniego his first horrifying look at his attacker. He described a terrifying hag-like entity with a humanoid form, completely covered in a dark cloak or robe, and possessing large, dark, and deeply unsettling eyes. The creature's appearance was so shocking and unnatural that Samaniego, a trained law enforcement officer, was frozen in a state of profound primal fear. As the initial shock subsided, Samaniego's training kicked in, and he hit the accelerator in an attempt to flee. The entity, however, was not easily deterred. It launched itself from the hood of the car and flew through the air, keeping pace with the speeding vehicle and continuing its assault by repeatedly smashing against the windows. In a desperate act of self-preservation, Samaniego swerved his car violently, managing to dislodge the creature from its perch. He then accelerated away, leaving the being behind as he sped to the relative safety of the police station to report the bizarre and traumatic event. His harrowing ordeal, however, would prove to be just the beginning of a much larger and stranger story. In the subsequent investigation into Samoniego's report, a remarkable development occurred that lent a degree of credibility to his seemingly unbelievable account. During interviews, a police officer from the neighboring municipality of Santa Catarina, along with 2 additional officers from the Regia Force, came forward to admit that they too had seen the same flying creature that Samaniego had encountered. The fact that multiple law enforcement officers independently confirmed the presence of this unidentified flying humanoid transformed the event from a lone officer's strange story into a corroborated official police incident. This collective testimony from trained observers helped to quell some of the immediate ridicule and prompted a serious, albeit baffled, official response. The area, particularly around Monterrey and the nearby Cerro de la Silla, became a focal point for further sightings, with numerous witnesses and even controversial video footage emerging, suggesting the region was a hotspot for a phenomenon that remains entirely unknown to science. The phenomena of flying humanoids in Central and South America extends far beyond the recent PELACARAS accounts, forming a rich tapestry of modern sightings and ancient folklore. One of the most significant modern events occurred in Chile in 2000, centered around the town of Calama. For several months, residents lived in terror of a creature dubbed La Voladora, or the Flying One, described as a terrifying entity with a large head, piercing red eyes, and formidable claws or talons. This being was said to emit a horrifying shriek as it soared through the night sky, and it was accused of attacking livestock and even people. The panic grew so intense that the Chilean military deployed a team to investigate, and a local judge ordered the creation of a special commission to address the public's fear, though no definitive explanation was ever found, cementing the case as a landmark in modern South American UFO lore. In Brazil, the legend of the Mapinguari offers a folkloric precursor to these sightings, a terrifying beast from the Amazon rainforest that, while not always depicted with wings, if ever, possesses supernatural mobility and a horrifying presence. Described as a massive, one-eyed creature covered in thick, matted fur and sometimes said to have a second mouth on its stomach, the Mapinguari is said to be able to move with incredible speed and even become invisible. It's known for its terrifying roar that can cause paralysis, and for its foul-smelling defense mechanism. Use your imaginations. While a ground-based entity, its ability to appear and disappear, its monstrous humanoid form, and its deep roots in Amazonian mythology place it within the same cultural context of fearsome, non-human predators that defy easy explanation, serving as a spiritual cousin to the more modern flying humanoid encounters. Further north in Central America, Mexico has a long and well-documented history of flying humanoid encounters, most famously the Witches of Monterrey in the early 2000s. These entities were described as dark, cloaked figures, often appearing as hags or old women who were witnessed flying high over the city, sometimes chasing cars or appearing on rooftops. These sightings were so numerous and credible that they became a national sensation, with numerous videos and photographs emerging as evidence. This phenomenon is often linked to the region's deep-rooted folklore of brujas, or witches, who are said to transform into animal forms or use magic to fly, providing a cultural framework through which these modern sightings are interpreted. The consistency of these accounts across different regions of Mexico suggests a persistent and widespread belief in, or fear of, airborne humanoid entities. These modern reports are also deeply connected to ancient indigenous mythology, which is full of similar figures. In the highlands of Chiapas, Mexico, the Tzotzil people have long told legends of the Hikal, or the Black Man. They named it, not me. A winged, nocturnal entity known as a kidnapper and, let's say, a bit fresh. Gets a bit fresh with the ladies. Further south in the folklore of Ecuador, there is the Tintin, not the boring Belgian comic book, but another bat-like demon. And in Peru and Chile, the myth of the Chon-Chon persists.
Give me some Chon-Chon!
A creature described as a flying, vampire-type monster, often said to be a transformed sorcerer or calcu that preys on the living. This probably goes all the way back to mythological godlike figures such as, what's his name? Oh, shit. There's a bat god who's fucking crazy looking. Like, all the representations of him are pretty badass looking, to be honest. But, His name escapes me at the moment.
Whoosh.
Hello, future me. That bat god's name would be Camazotz. While I'm thinking about it, there's also an Aztec goddess named, I believe it's Papalotl, who is referred to as the obsidian butterfly, who is sort of a warrior woman goddess / vampire goddess. Fucking badass metal gods down there they got.
Whoosh.
These ancient legends demonstrate that their fear of flying humanoids is not a recent invention, but a deeply ingrained part of the cultural and psychological landscape of Central and South America, providing a mythological foundation upon which modern sightings continue to be built. As of early 2026, the PELACARAS, or face peelers phenomena, has evolved from a terrifying jungle legend into a complex, multi-layered crisis. A crisis, y'all, involving organized crime, advanced technology, and indigenous resistance. What began in mid-2023 as frantic reports from the Iquitu community in Alto Nanay, describing 7-foot-tall, silver-clad, quote-unquote, aliens that were immune to gunfire and capable of hovering, has been systematically reclassified by Peruvian authorities as a sophisticated psychological warfare tactic. Investigation by the National Police and specialized prosecutors concluded that these beings were actually illegal gold mining cartels. These syndicates reportedly utilized high-tech jetpacks and thrusters to navigate the dense, inaccessible canopy of the Amazon, intentionally dressing in macabre, non-human disguises to terrorize locals and clear them away from the lucrative, unlicensed mining sites along the Nanay River. Basically, it's the old Scooby-Doo skidoo tactic. But, you know, well-funded, etc. The current situation remains volatile because, despite the quote-unquote alien explanation, the violence hasn't ceased. Throughout 2024 and 2025, the PELACARAS sightings shifted toward more conventional but equally brutal paramilitary tactics. The phenomenon is now inextricably linked to the broader gold war in Peru, where international cartels have moved into the Amazon to fill the vacuum left by shifting drug routes. Communities still report nocturnal incursions, but the entities are now recognized as human mercenaries who use night vision optics and surgical-grade tools to maim their victims. These attacks serve a dual purpose. They harvest quote-unquote trophies or organs for the black market, a grim echo of the ancient Pishtaco myth, and they ensure that local populations remain too terrified to interfere with illegal mining operations. Today, the PELACARAS situation is a focal point of Peruvian national security. Large swaths of the Amazon remain under a state of emergency, with the military struggling to patrol a region where the geography favors the mobility of jetpack-equipped miners over ground-based troops. I think that's pretty much any area that's going to lean more towards easier with jetpacks. For the indigenous people, the PELACARAS are no longer just a myth or a mystery. They are a living manifestation of resource dispossession. The phenomenon stands as a bizarre 21st century intersection where ancient folklore meets cutting-edge aerospace technology as well as psychological operations, leaving rural villages caught in the crossfire of a high-tech hunt for gold. The PELACARAS, or face peelers phenomenon, is a modern Amazonian evolution of the centuries-old Pishtaco myth, a terrifying figure in Andean and Amazonian folklore believed to murder indigenous people to harvest their fat, organs, and skin. While the folklore dates back to the Spanish conquest, the specific PELACARAS moniker and documented reports of violent physical encounters have surfaced in distinct waves since the mid-20th century. Now, I didn't go all the way back, but I went back as far as 1950 to dig up some accounts here. So, during the 1950s and 60s, the Pishtaco, or fat stealer phenomena, transformed from a colonial-era bogeyman, or boogerman, into a specific response to the Belaunde administration's push to modernize the Peruvian interior. As the Marginal Highway, also known as Carretera Marginal de la Selva, began cutting through the departments of Huánuco, Pasco, and Junín, indigenous and mestizo communities reported a surge in disappearances. The PELACARAS of this era were almost exclusively described as tall, light-skinned foreigners, often described as gringos or engineers, wearing leather jackets and tall boots. In the remote villages of the Huallaga Valley, I think I got that right, stories circulated of victims being lured into white vans or temporary construction camps where they were suspended upside down over slow-burning fires to render their body fat into canisters. Ugh. One of the most chilling accounts from this period occurred in 1964 near the town of Tingo Maria. Local residents discovered a series of corpses in the thickets bordering the newly cleared roads. The bodies were reportedly found with precise vertical incisions stretching from the sternum to the pelvis, with all the subcutaneous fat meticulously scraped away while the muscular tissue remained largely untouched. These quote-unquote processed victims is very similar to how one field dresses a deer after hunting, etc. These processed victims fueled the widespread belief that the fat was being sold to international aerospace firms, of all groups, oddly enough, to lubricate the engines of jet planes or to the United States military for high-tech weaponry that supposedly required human lipids to prevent overheating. In the Callahan de Huaylas, fear became so localized that any outsider seen carrying a briefcase or medical kit, such as traveling Peace Corps volunteers or vaccination teams, were accused of being a quote-unquote fat thief looking for children to peel. By the late 1960s, the paranoia reached a fever pitch in the Pasco region, specifically around the mining hubs. Community elders from the Quechua-speaking highlands documented PELACARAS encounters where attackers used chemical-soaked cloths to knock victims unconscious instantly. The old, hey, does this smell like chloroform? When survivors were found, they often lacked any memory of the event but displayed surgically clean scars on their backs, often over the kidneys. These accounts were so pervasive that they fundamentally altered the social landscape. Labor recruitment for state projects plummeted as villagers refused to work alongside white strangers. Anthropologists like Mary Weissmantle and Andrew Canessa later noted that these accounts weren't just mass hysteria, but a graphic, literal metaphor for how the rural population felt their vitality and resources were being extracted by the capitalist machine of the West. During the late 1980s, as the internal conflict between the Peruvian state and the Shining Path, or Sendero Luminoso, reached its most violent peak, the Pixtaco myth mutated into the terrifying saque ojos, or eye gougers. I'm going to go with eye gougers instead of butchering that word over and over. The Shining Path can probably best and most quickly be summed up as a far-left Maoist guerrilla group in Peru that launched a bloody insurgency against the state in 1980. That was founded in the late 1960s by former philosophy professor Abimael Guzman. So watch out for those fucking philosophy students. The group sought to overthrow the Peruvian government and replace it with a quote-unquote new democracy based on a dictatorship of the proletariat. Always works out great. So, the era was defined by a shift from harvesting fat to harvesting organs, specifically targeting the Department of Ayacucho and the VRAEM, Apurimac, Ene, and Montaro River Valley. Throughout 1987 and 88, a wave of hysteria gripped the central highlands and the high jungle as bodies began appearing along the outskirts of villages like Huanta and San Francisco. Not that one. These victims were found with their eyeballs cleanly extracted, leaving behind hollow, blackened sockets that showed no sign of the jagged tearing associated with animal predation. The precision of these removals convinced locals that the attackers were not monsters, but clandestine medical teams working for international organ trafficking syndicates. The most graphic accounts from this period involve lone travelers and mochileros, or backpackers, who vanished along the Andean Amazonian corridors. In September 1989, rumors reached a breaking point in the city of Ayacucho, where a mob nearly lynched a group of foreign researchers suspected of being eye gougers. The fear was fueled by reports of victims, often young children or healthy men, whose corpses were found discarded in irrigation ditches or near remote airstrips. Their faces intact except for the missing ocular globes. My God. Witnesses claim to have seen unmarked black helicopters landing in the dead of night, from which men in white lab coats would emerge to carry out quote-unquote surgeries in makeshift mobile tents. This period saw the PELACARAS identity merge with a deep distrust of Western medicine as rumors spread that the eyes were being flown to the United States or Europe to restore the sight of wealthy elites. This very much reminds me of the, what is it?
Whoosh.
Hello, future me again. It's the Guadaparenga Reservoir. I'm glad that I was able to come back in and put this here because it's a lot better than hearing me make a bunch of pseudo South American sounds in my mouth for who knows how fucking long it took for me to figure that out. Back to the show.
Whoosh.
The gruesome story of a man whose body was found inexplicably mutilated to all fucking back near a reservoir in Brazil. We covered it in our, I think it was Val Valerian episode, and also the Linda Moulton Howe cattle mutilation episode way back in the day. But it is intensely gruesome stuff. Just a lot of it just doesn't add up. It doesn't seem like the type of violence that your regular cartel would inflict, unless the cartel has, like, I don't know, lay low Nazi war criminals with scientific acumen hiding out amongst their ranks, which is possible. It's possible. I don't know.
Whoosh.
There are numerous pictures of this particular mutilation, the Guadaparenga Reservoir mutilation. I don't recommend looking at them, but to understand what was done to this man's body, that's the first place to go look, and it'll stick with you. It'll stick with you.
Whoosh.
But the eye gougers phenomenon was exacerbated by the lawlessness of the red zones, where neither the military nor the police had full control. In the village of Yochegua in 1990, a survivor reportedly escaped an attempted extraction, claiming he was paralyzed by a blue-tinted spray before an attacker in a mask approached him with a silver scalpel. These accounts were so pervasive that they forced the Peruvian government to issue official communiques denying the existence of organized eye trafficking rings. However, for the rural population, the PELACARAS had simply updated their tools. They were no longer just stealing fat from machines, they were stealing vision and life to fuel a global black market, leaving behind hollowed-out husks as a warning to those who dared to travel the jungle pass alone. In November 2009, the PELACARAS legend transitioned from campfire horror to a global headline when the Peruvian National Police announced the dismantling of a criminal organization dubbed the Pistacos of Huánuco. I think I covered these guys in the medicinal cannibalism episode as well, but we'll get into it here a little bit as well. Led by a man named Hilario Cudenya, the gang was accused of operating in the remote Huallaga Valley, specifically targeting travelers on the lonely roads between Huánuco and Bosco. During a high-profile press conference in Lima, police officials displayed a plastic soda bottle filled with amber-colored liquid, which they claimed was a high-grade human fat
broken down, boy, in its purest form.
extracted from a recent victim named Abel Matos Aranda. Matos had disappeared in mid-September, and his body was later discovered in a shallow grave. The remains were described in gruesome detail as having been partially decapitated and surgically hollowed out, with large sections of skin and fat tissue missing from the torso and thighs. The investigation revealed a chilling rendering process that mirrored the most graphic elements of Andean folklore. Police alleged that Cudenya and his accomplices, including 2 suspected Italian nationals who were never apprehended, still out there, lured victims to a remote laboratory where they were hung from meat hooks. The gang reportedly used candles and heat lamps to slowly melt the fat from the corpses, collecting the runoff in containers to be sold on the international black market. Investigators claim that the fat was destined for European cosmetic laboratories in countries like Italy and France, supposedly to be used as high-end ingredients for anti-wrinkle creams. And if you know anything about Sandra Bullock's beauty regimen, it's not all that far-fetched a concept.
It's foreskin from a Korean baby.
These details ignited a national frenzy, as the PELACARAS were no longer seen as supernatural entities, but as industrial-scale butchers, profiting from the literal bodies of the poor. However, the case took a surreal turn when the global scientific community and medical experts voiced extreme skepticism, noting that human fat has no commercial value in modern cosmetics, as synthetic and botanical oils are far cheaper and safer. This led to a scandalous revelation that the head of the anti-kidnapping unit, General Jorge Mejia, was eventually accused of sensationalizing the case to distract the public from a different political scandal involving police misconduct. Police misconduct was an epidemic in the world. Despite the eventual collapse of the cosmetic motive, the physical evidence of the victims remained undeniable. The discovery of the fat-rendering lab, quote-unquote, in the Huánuco jungle, complete with its grisly tools and drained remains, serves as a permanent graphic confirmation for many Peruvians that the PELACARAS were real, lethal, and active in the modern world. Between 2019 and 2020, the PELACARAS phenomenon took a distinct technological turn in the Ucayali region. Ucayali? Ucayali. Ucayali. That's what I'm going with. Specifically terrorizing the Shipibo-Conibo communities located along the banks of the Ucayali River near Pucallpa. Got 10 things to do, got to keep on top of my life. Just knocked over an old lady, keep walking. During this period, tribal leaders and village shamans began reporting a series of inexplicable night raids carried out by entities that no longer fit the description of human miners or travelers. Witnesses described attackers as towering, thin figures clad in shimmering dark suits that appeared to absorb the light of their torches. The most terrifying development was the reported use of electric guns, quote-unquote, these handheld devices that emit a silent, bluish flash of light. Victims struck by these beams didn't suffer traditional gunshot wounds, but were found in a state of total paralysis, their bodies rigid and their skin cold to the touch, as if their nervous systems had been short-circuited by an unknown current. The graphic nature of these encounters was most vividly captured in the drawings of the children in the affected villages. Go check out some of these drawings because they are just, in the context of children's drawings and what is happening and what they portrayed in some of these drawings, fucking harrowing stuff. It's fucked up. They depicted their attackers with oversized, glowing yellow eyes and elongated limbs. In one documented incident near the community of Roaboya, a young man was found collapsed on a jungle trail. He was described as being in a violent, convulsive state, his muscles twitching uncontrollably while a thick, frothy sweat poured from his skin. When he eventually regained consciousness days later, he remained permanently mute, his tongue darting in and out of his mouth as if he were trying to scream, but making no sound. Villagers who attempted to intervene in these quote-unquote harvests reported that their own traditional weapons, such as machetes and arrows, seemed to pass through the entities or were deflected by an invisible humming field that felt like, quote-unquote, biting ants against their skin. Quite disturbing. As the sightings intensified throughout 2020, the physical evidence left behind on survivors became increasingly gruesome. Some victims returned to their families with perfectly circular, bloodless cauterizations on their necks or behind their ears, areas where the quote-unquote PELACARAS allegedly inserted probes to drain the essence or monitor the brain. The Shipibo-Conibo elders noted that these beings appeared specifically during times of heavy cloud cover or rain, using the environmental noise to mask the low-frequency humming of their equipment. These accounts created a profound psychological rift in the region as the traditional face peeler lore merged with the modern UFO mythology, leaving the communities to believe that they were being hunted by a force that was neither fully human nor entirely terrestrial. In August 2023, the PELACARAS phenomenon reached its fever pitch in the remote district of Alto Nene, specifically targeting the Iquitu indigenous community of San Antonio. Not that one. For several weeks, the village lived in a state of total siege, with residents describing nightly encounters with Los PELACARAS, whom they identified as 7-foot-tall extraterrestrial beings possessing elongated heads, yellowish glowing eyes, and silver armor that appeared impervious to the community's 16-gauge shotguns. The most harrowing and graphic events occurred on the night of July 29th, 2023, involving a 15-year-old girl, I believe this is the one I mentioned earlier, who was ambushed while walking near the village perimeter. According to witness statements and family members, a tall entity materialized from out of the shadows and seized the girl, attempting to drag her into the dense brush. During the struggle, the attacker used a hidden razor-sharp instrument to perform a near-surgical laceration across her neck, narrowly missing her carotid artery. The wound was described by local health officials as being unnaturally clean and deep, requiring immediate hospitalization in Iquitos and leaving the teenager in a state of severe psychological trauma. The terror intensified as men from the village engaged in direct combat with these intruders, only to experience a reality-bending defiance of physics. Multiple hunters reported firing their weapons point blank at these figures, witnessing the pellets strike the quote-unquote armor without any effect, only for the entities to rise vertically into the air and zoom away over the canopy with a mechanical whirring sound. These accounts triggered a massive mobilization by the Peruvian Navy and National Police, who journeyed 10 hours by river to reach the isolated community. Upon investigation, prosecutors and forensics experts from the Ministry of the Interior proposed a terrifying but grounded explanation. These quote-unquote aliens were actually members of Brazilian and Colombian gold mining cartels, such as the Comando Vermelho. These cartels were reportedly utilizing commercial-grade jetpacks and high-tech flight thrusters, similar to those developed by companies like Gravity Industries, to bypass the impenetrable jungle floor and terrorize the ARQUIVO into abandoning their land, which is rich in alluvial gold deposits. By early 2024, the investigation concluded that the face peeler guys was a deliberate act of psychological warfare. The surgical precision of the attacks was attributed to the use of specialized tools designed to mimic the Pishtaco legends, ensuring the local population remained too frightened to document the illegal dredging operations. Despite this official explanation, the ARQUIVO remain in a state of high alert, as the jetpack-equipped miners have continued, to this day, it's still going on, to be sighted in the surrounding Laredo region. The situation stands as a brutal landmark in Amazonian history, a moment where black market aerospace technology was weaponized against an ancient culture, turning a centuries-old myth into a literal airborne threat that remains a source of blood and terror in the deep jungle today. So, if you're anything like me, and chances are, since you're listening to this podcast, you likely happen to be brilliant and inquisitive, just the type of individual that the most psychopathic of higher authorities either fear and or find themselves inexplicably attracted to. Your first question upon hearing of these most recent accounts is probably something along the lines of, if these so-called quote-unquote miners have access to such advanced technology, why are they not making money off of that, as opposed to a needlessly complex, prolonged, protracted scheme involving quote-unquote mining? Well, apparently the answer to that goes something like this. While it might seem bizarre to use six-figure aerospace technology for the gritty work of illegal mining, the reality of the global gold market makes this needlessly complex scheme a highly rational and incredibly lucrative business strategy for organized crime. In the Peruvian Amazon, illegal gold mining has evolved into a $6 billion annual industry, often outperforming the cocaine trade in terms of sheer profit and ease of money laundering. Beating out the cocaine trade. Who'd have thunk it?
Whoosh.
Though now that I'm thinking about it, pretty much all the cocaine I've done in about the last 20, 25 years been pretty shitty. Maybe that's just a Texas thing.
Whoosh.
For a powerful cartel, the $340,000 to $450,000 price tag of a high-tech jetpack is viewed not as a luxury, but as a minor operational expense. Write it off. These groups aren't interested in the legitimate tech market, because selling or licensing such hardware would require interacting with governments and regulatory bodies and all that pain-in-the-ass bullshit, basically exposing their leadership. Instead, they use tools to secure access to black gold deposits that can pay for the equipment 10 times over in a single successful season. The strategic utility of the PELACARAS guise provides a layer of security that traditional weaponry can't offer. By utilizing the jetpacks to navigate the dense canopy and terrorize indigenous groups like the ARQUIVO, the cartels create a psychological no-go zone. The alien myth ensures that locals stay indoors at night and flee from new prospecting sites, allowing the miners to operate heavy dredging machinery without interference or the need for a large, visible security force. This mobility also gives them a massive tactical advantage over the Peruvian military. While government troops must spend 10 hours navigating winding rivers to reach a report of violence, jetpack-equipped miners can vanish into the deep jungles in just minutes, if not seconds.
Ninja vanish!
Scouting new deposits or relocating equipment with a speed that ground-based forces just can't match. Furthermore, gold remains the ultimate untraceable asset. Unlike high-tech patents or proprietary software, which are easily monitored and seized by international authorities, gold can be melted down, mixed with legal supplies and injected into the global economy with almost zero traceability.
Whoosh.
If only we had some international trade and barter system where cocaine could take the place of gold. But, I don't know. I guess people are just really uptight squares these days.
Whoosh.
To these syndicates, the PELACARAS phenomenon is simply a 21st century update to an old extraction model. They're using the most advanced tools available to protect a primitive but vastly more stable source of wealth, proving that in the lawless fringes of the Amazon, the most futuristic technology is often used to facilitate the world's oldest and most brutal form of resource theft. The persistent reports of silent or low-noise flight from the Iquitu community are likely due to the use of electric ducted fan or EDF technology rather than traditional liquid-fueled jet engines. While classic jetpacks like the classic jetpacks, I can't even believe I wrote that. While classic jetpacks like the Gravity Industries jet suit use micro turbines that scream at over 120 decibels, equivalent to a concert speaker, essentially, modern EDF systems utilize high-speed electric motors and multi-blade fans encased in ducts that dramatically muffle sound. Companies like Whisper Aero have pioneered ultra-quiet thrusters, such as the EQ250, that shift acoustic energy into ultrasonic frequencies inaudible to human ears. From a distance in the dense, sound-absorbing Amazonian canopy, an operator using such a system would appear to float with only a faint, ghostly whir or electric hum instead of a huge, cacophonous engine roar, as you'll get with most jetpack equipment today. The most probable source for this technology is the civilian drone and eVTOL, or electric vertical takeoff and landing market, which has seen a massive surge in high-performance components. Cartels don't need to invent this technology. They simply purchase off-the-shelf, heavy-lift propulsion modules designed for industrial cargo drones or experimental personal flight. Large-scale EDF units capable of lifting a human can be purchased through legitimate hobbyist and industrial suppliers like Hacker Motor or specialized aerospace startups. Front companies and ghost receipts, to avoid a direct paper trail, like cartels, will utilize front agricultural or environmental firms. A purchase of 10 heavy-lift electric thrusters can be justified on paper as equipment for autonomous reforestation drones or remote cargo transport for legal mining operations. Write it off, write it off, write it off. Business expense. Equipment is often routed through secondary markets in Brazil or Colombia, where enforcement is stretched thin, to say the least. Components are shipped in parts to avoid arms exports triggers, with receipts pointing to shell corporations in Panama or the Cayman Islands that vanish shortly after the transaction is complete. It's very much how Batman does it. More on Batman later. The cartels likely procure the expertise to operate these suits from the same pool as their narco-sub pilots, former military or disgruntled aerospace engineers from Eastern Europe, Israel, or the United States. These specialists are paid in untraceable gold to modify existing tech for jungle conditions, ensuring that even if a quote-unquote receipt were found, it would lead to a defunct P.O. box thousands of miles from the Dene River. As of early 2026, the investigation into the PELACARAS attacks points to a complex network of transnational criminal organizations as the most likely culprits. I can think of a couple three-letter agencies to throw in the mix with that as well. According to the Peruvian Public Ministry of the National Police, the primary actors are illegal gold mining cartels, primarily organizing from Brazil and Colombia. Actually, I would say three-letter agencies and cartels, not really that much demarcation. Hardly any difference, really. These days, I would assume, if their past is anything to go on. Anyway, these groups, such as the aforementioned Comando Vermelho, have aggressively expanded into the Nene River Basin in the Loreto region, an area where roughly 80% of regional illegal gold dredging occurs. Experts note that these cartels use high-tech equipment, including jetpacks and thrusters, specifically to terrorize and displace indigenous communities like the Iquitu, ensuring they can operate deep in the forest without local interference or witnesses. The involvement of domestic and foreign gangs has intensified as gold prices hit historic highs in 2026, making the PELACARAS psychological warfare a highly profitable tactic. Organizations such as the Tren de Aragua and local factions like the Guardianes de la Troca have also been linked to the broader surge in mining violence across Peru. While some theories suggest the involvement of private military contractors or intelligence agencies due to the sophisticated nature of their technology, Peruvian investigators maintain that these are well-funded criminal syndicates that have simply adapted modern aerospace tools for illicit resource extraction. There's also a significant concern regarding institutional complicity. Reports indicate that these mining cartels often operate with the silent partners of corrupted local officials, including members of the police and justice system who receive a share of the illegal gold. This corruption creates a vicious cycle where military and police enforcement remains weak on the ground, allowing these jetpack miners to evade capture despite multiple high-profile attacks. Consequently, the most likely culprit is not a single entity, but a mutation of organized crime that has grown into a sophisticated structure capable of eroding both the Amazon's riverbeds as well as the local government. What's the term? Escalation. The end of Batman Part 1. Escalation. Now there's real-life supervillains out there terrorizing Amazonian villagers. Now, while this all smacks of the ridiculous Scooby-Doo style plot lines, there's actually some precedent to events such as these. The precedent for weaponizing folklore to achieve military or territorial objectives is most famously rooted in the psychological operations or psyop tactics of one General Edward Lansdale, who I previously did an episode on. Shitty audio, but good information in it. During the early 1950s. While serving as an advisor to the Filipino government against the Hukbalahap or Huk insurgents, Lansdale exploited a deep-seated cultural fear of the aswang, a shape-shifting, blood-sucking vampire of Filipino myth. In one documented operation, Lansdale's tactical team kidnapped a Huk rebel, punctured 2 holes in his neck, drained his body of blood, and left the corpse on a frequently used trail. When the insurgents found their comrade vampirized, they fled the region in terror, believing the area was haunted by a supernatural predator. This operation proved that high-tech or high-resource military forces could achieve total area denial not through superior firepower, but by masquerading as an ancient local nightmare. In a more modern context, the PELACARAS phenomenon mirrors several gray zone operations, where intelligence agencies or private military contractors, or PMCs, utilize UFO or monster narratives to mask clandestine activities. We kind of touched on this a little bit in the last episode on Ambrose Bierce. During the late 20th century, the U.S. Air Force and CIA reportedly allowed, and at times encouraged, the UFO hysteria surrounding Area 51 to serve as a convenient cover for the testing of stealth aircraft like the U-2 and SR-71 Blackbird. By letting the public believe they were seeing quote-unquote flying saucers, the military ensured that any civilian reports of top-secret technology would be dismissed by the mainstream media as conspiracy theories or UFO sightings, etc., effectively gaslighting the population to protect state secrets. Even more recently, in the 2010s and 2020s, reports have emerged from conflict zones in the Middle East and Africa where PMCs have allegedly used holographic projections or directional acoustic devices like LRADs to simulate supernatural occurrences. In some instances, ghostly voices or religious icons were reportedly projected into battlefield environments to induce panic among superstitious or less technologically equipped militias. These tactics, often referred to as quote-unquote God voice technology or V2K, represent the digital evolution of Lansdale's aswang tactics. Whether it's a cartel using jetpacks to play the role of the face peeler or an intelligence agency using spirit orbs to hide a new drone, the strategy remains the same. It's far more efficient to make an enemy run from a ghost than it is to fight them as a man. While many of the most sensational claims regarding staged supernatural events remain classified or exist in the realm of proposed but unexecuted strategies, declassified documents from Operation Northwoods and Project MKUltra reveal a high-level military interest in using the quote-unquote miraculous or the quote-unquote terrifying to manipulate public consciousness. In the 1962 Operation Northwoods Memorandum, the Joint Chiefs of Staff proposed a series of quote-unquote false flag operations to justify a war with Cuba. Among these was a chilling psychological plan to convince the Cuban population that the second coming of Christ was imminent. It's what Lansdale referred to as elimination by illumination. What an asshole, but also pretty fucking awesome. The plan involved using a submarine to surface near the Cuban coast and fire star shells or flares into the night sky to create a celestial spectacle. While agents on the ground spread rumors that the Virgin of Regla was appearing to denounce the Castro regime. This demonstrates that the U.S. intelligence apparatus has long viewed religious and folkloric icons as tactical tools to be deployed like any other weapon. I can't say it enough. I probably bring it up almost every goddamn episode, but your religious beliefs, whatever they may be, can very easily be hijacked and used against you. So please, if you're packing any serious religious beliefs, please also practice discernment, please. Within the sprawling dark history of MK Ultra, researchers explored the intersection of hallucinogens and sensory deprivation to induce quote-unquote mystical or alien experiences in subjects. Subprojects under the MK Ultra umbrella sought to determine if chemical agents like LSD or the nightmarish-sounding BZ. If you've never heard of BZ, my God, look into it. It is... Oh, God. Ugh. Anyways, moving on. It could be used to make an enemy force believe they were being attacked by demons or gods. One specific area of research involved the use of staged hauntings or poltergeist activity, utilizing hidden speakers, infrasound, which causes feelings of dread and visual ghostly distortions, and psychotropic aerosols to render a target building or village uninhabitable due to superstitious terror. These experiments were designed to test how quickly a human's rational mind would collapse when confronted with a quote-unquote supernatural threat that their senses told them was real. A more contemporary parallel to the PELACARAS phenomenon can be found in the declassified reports concerning the voice of God technology, quote-unquote, officially known as the microwave auditory effect, or MAE. Documents from the late 20th century describe a weapon that can beam modulated radio frequencies directly into the inner ear of a person from a distance, making them, quote-unquote, hear voices inside their own head that no one else can hear. Intelligence agencies discussed using this to simulate the voice of a deity or a legendary figure to command an enemy to lay down their arms or flee a specific territory. When combined with the visual of a hovering, silent alien or monster, these technologies create a theater of terror that is virtually indistinguishable from supernatural events to an uninitiated witness. Very shades of Bluebeam, 50 Shades of Bluebeam. I believe there's also been some talk in the news recently, again, about Havana Syndrome. Same thing going on here. So keep these psyops or psyops adjacent concepts in mind because we will be returning to them momentarily. But first, we need to explore the more brutal, oftentimes straight up lethal nature of alien/UFO encounters throughout South America. South America has a documented history of unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP, if you prefer, and humanoid encounters that have resulted in severe physical injury and, in some cases, even death. Unlike many global reports that focus on distant observations, South American cases frequently involve direct, aggressive physical interactions, often characterized by intense beams of light that can cause medical conditions ranging from radiation sickness to permanent neurological damage. The following are just a few cases. There's the Colares Chupa Chupa flap. The Suck Suck flap. Sorry, I'm a child. Occurring between September 1977 and mid-1978, stands as perhaps the most aggressive and medically documented siege of unidentified aerial phenomena in history. Located on the coast of Para, Brazil, the island of Colares and the neighboring town of Santo Antonio do Tawa, perfect, became the epicenter of what locals described as hunting behavior, quote-unquote hunting behavior, by metallic probe-like objects. These craft, often described as small cylinders or quote-unquote refrigerators, emitting a low hum, would track victims at night and fire a highly concentrated, pencil-thin beam of light, usually green or white light, that could penetrate thatched roofs and wooden walls. Victims, primarily laborers and fishermen like one Manuel Espirito Santo, reported that he felt like as if a heavy weight was pressing against his chest, followed by an agonizing heat and a sensation of being, quote-unquote, sucked or drained of their life force. Yeah, it's not the fun kind of sucked feeling. The medical crisis was managed primarily by one Dr. Waide Sesim Carvalho. I definitely got that first name totally fucked. I apologize, Dr. Carvalho. Dr. Carvalho was the director of the Colares Health Unit at the time. Dr. Carvalho treated over 80 patients who exhibited a consistent and terrifying clinical profile. First-degree radiation burns, circular lesions with multiple puncture marks resembling like a fine needle biopsy, and localized necrosis. Ugh. Most disturbingly, patients suffered from acute anemia, so severe that their blood appeared translucent and failed to clot normally. Dr. Carvalho's contemporaneous notes described victims who were previously healthy falling into states of total physical collapse and permanent lethargy, almost as if their cellular energy had been extracted somehow. Despite pressure from her superiors to diagnose these as quote-unquote mass hysteria, the physical evidence, including the cauterized skin tissue and the rapid drop in red blood cell counts, points to a sophisticated, high-energy biological sampling operation. The lethality of the phenomenon was confirmed by several high-profile deaths, most notably that of a woman named Lourdes, who succumbed to quote-unquote unexplained energy depletion within 24 hours of being struck by a beam while sleeping. In response to the growing body count and mass exodus of the population, the Brazilian Air Force launched Operation Saucer, or Operação Prato. Thank you. Under the command of Captain Yorange de Hayanda. For 4 months, Hayanda's team tracked the objects using high-speed cameras and theodolites, which is essentially a high-precision instrument, optical instrument used to measure horizontal and vertical angles. So they were kind of trying to triangulate on these quote-unquote craft. They managed to capture over 500 photographs and 16mm film of the craft performing maneuvers that defied known physics. However, the mission took a dark psychological toll. Several of Hayanda's men suffered nervous breakdowns after witnessing quote-unquote humanoid occupants through the transparent domes of the craft, and the operation was abruptly shut down and classified. The Chupa Chupa mystery took its final lethal turn decades later in September 1997, shortly after Captain Hoyanda broke his silence in a series of explosive interviews with researchers A.J. Gevard and Marco Petit. Only weeks after detailing the surgical nature of the Colares attacks and his belief that the military was covering up a quote-unquote harvesting operation, Hoyanda was found dead in his home, reportedly having committed suicide using the belt of his bathrobe. His death remains a focal point for researchers who believe that the true nature of the Colares fat stealers, whether extraterrestrial, Nazi remnants, or a rogue breakaway group, was a secret so dangerous that even a highly decorated officer could not survive its disclosure. Next, we've got the Varginha Incident, which began on January 20th, 1996, in the state of Minas Gerais, Brazil. It remains one of the most high-stakes, close encounters in modern history due to the direct involvement of the Brazilian military and the subsequent biological fatality of a young officer. The event was triggered when 3 young women, sisters Liliane and Valkyria Silva, and their friend Katia Andrade, encountered a bipedal creature crouched in a vacant lot. It's described as being roughly 5 feet tall, with dark, oily brown skin, 3 distinct protuberances or horns, horn-like extensions on its head, and enormous glowing red eyes that appeared to lack pupils. The creature seemed to be in a state of extreme physical distress or injury, emitting a foul ammonia-like odor that was reported by multiple witnesses across the city as the smell of rotting sulfur, quote-unquote. I've seen a lot of artistic renditions of this creature crouched in a very frightened position. I don't know, I kind of just feel bad for it every time I see it. If I were in that situation, if I were able to get over my, intense freak out of the situation, of the incident itself, I probably would have, I don't know, tried to get my jacket and scream, "Get the fuck out of here," or something like that. But the old Harry and the Hendersons, "We don't want you around anymore," you know, for their own good, for their own good. The most lethal and scientifically baffling aspect of the case centers on Marco Eli Cerese, a 23-year-old corporal in the military police. According to testimonies from his colleagues and family, Cerese was part of a rapid response team that successfully captured one of these quote-unquote humanoids near the Hardim Andir neighborhood on the night of the initial sightings. During the chaotic apprehension, Cerese reportedly made direct, unprotected skin-to-skin contact with the creature as he wrestled it into a transport vehicle. While the being was allegedly whisked away to a series of secret facilities, including the Regional Hospital of Varginha and later the ESA or Sergeant's Preparatory School in Tres Corações, Cerese began a rapid and horrifying physical decline that baffled the medical community. And once again, listeners, if you're you speak Spanish, Portuguese, etc., I apologize. Within days of the capture, Cerese developed a massive systemic infection that manifested as localized tumors and excruciating pain in his back and arm. He was admitted to the Bom Pastor Hospital, where doctors noted that his immune system had suffered a total collapse similar to an advanced stage of AIDS, but occurring over a period of just hours. Despite being a previously healthy, athletic young man, his body became a breeding ground for a highly virulent, multi-resistant bacterium that modern antibiotics could not touch. Clinical reports described his state as, quote-unquote, biological liquefaction, which sounds both repulsive and fucking terrifying. But basically, his internal organs began to fail simultaneously as the infection consumed his soft tissue from the inside out. Corporal Cerese died on February 15th, Valentine's Day, bummer, or the day after, 1996, and his death was immediately shrouded in military secrecy. His family was initially denied access to the autopsy results, and the burial was conducted under suspicious haste. The official forensic report, eventually obtained by researchers like the aforementioned A.J. Gavard, I think that's how you say it, cited quote-unquote generalized infection, but failed to identify the specific source of the pathogen. However, independent medical analysts who reviewed the case suggested that Cerese had been exposed to, quote, an exotic biological agent, unquote, which, technically true. I mean, they ain't lying, I guess. It's very much a yada, yada, yada type of answer. It was a pathogen that, while technically terrestrial in structure, possessed a level of aggression and environmental resistance unknown to human medicine, at least at the time. Who knows what they could have back engineered or, I don't know, extracted from potential samples such as this. His death serves as a grim confirmation that the aliens, quote unquote, or humanoids of South America aren't just a visual curiosity, but a lethal biological hazard to those who dare to make physical contact. There's also the reoccurring infrasound and radiation link. The declassified Defense Intelligence Agency report notes that close-range exposure to anomalous aircraft can cause paralysis, electrical shocks, and, quote, anomalous acute field effects on biological tissue. The American Cash Landrum incident immediately comes to mind, in which I believe it was all three of the people who encountered a craft that was being accompanied by military aircraft as well, essentially came down with cancer out of nowhere. And they tried to just hound the government and sue and saying, like, we're pretty sure this is a secret government technology that you guys are practicing, since there was a distinct military presence and it gave us fucking cancer. So we want what's ours. I think they maybe settled out of court, for lack of a better term. And I don't mean that as like a euphemism for, they fell on some bullets or anything.
Whoosh.
Hey, future me injecting once again. Actually, they didn't get shit interjecting. Despite the severe health issues suffered by Betty Cash, Vicky Landrum, and Colby Landrum, which included radiation-like burns, hair loss, and permanent physical damage, their legal attempts to secure compensation were unsuccessful. After the 1980 encounter, the victims filed medical damage claims with the Air Force, which were denied within 2 weeks on the grounds that no military or government operation had occurred at that time and place, according to the records. In 1982, they sued the federal government for $20 million in damages. And in 1986, August 21st, 1986, a U.S. District Court judge dismissed the case. The court was persuaded by testimony from military officials who stated that no U.S. agency possessed a diamond-shaped craft, as was seen by Cash and Landrum. Consequently, the plaintiffs failed to prove government involvement. The victims were left to pay for their extensive medical treatments out of pocket. Betty Cash, the most severely affected, died in 1998 on the anniversary of the original inciting incident, having required hospitalization at least once every year following the encounter. Just knowing how the American healthcare system works in conjunction with the government and military intelligence, I can imagine what an extreme, next level, ultra, super duper pain in the ass it must have been for these people to try and get some compensation for their medical mishap after encountering a quote-unquote UFO. But anyways, back to the show.
Whoosh.
In South America, these field effects are frequently reported as intentional attacks, often occurring in remote areas where witnesses have no prior knowledge of such technology. These encounters suggest that the danger in South American UAP events often stems from a lack of safety distance, quote-unquote safety distance, between witnesses and the objects, as if it's general knowledge. It's like, don't get close to that. Usually that's pretty instinctual, but you can't help being overcome by curiosity when you have a potential world-to-world connection taking place, let alone having little to no idea what that fucking thing is going to do, come near you, etc. Anyways, but these lead to high doses of radiation or directed energy injuries that the human body cannot survive. Beyond the famous cases in Colares and Varginha, the South American continent, particularly in the Andean and Amazonian corridors, is home to a high concentration of aggressive, physically damaging encounters with unknown entities. These events are often characterized by localized terror where victims suffer from permanent neurological trauma, severe physiological quote-unquote extraction symptoms, and unexplained deaths that forensic investigators have struggled to categorize. Next up, we've got the death of Inácio de Souza. A lot of de Souzas in Brazil. Oh, that's like a Smith or a Jones over there? Let me know. Occurring on August 13th, 1967, in the state of Goiás, Brazil. And it remains one of the most chilling examples of a direct, quote-unquote, counterattack by a UAP resulting in a documented biological fatality. The event took place at the Santa Maria farm, where de Souza and his wife, Maria, were returning home from a day of work. Upon approaching their farmhouse, they observed a large disc-shaped craft approximately 35 feet in diameter, resting on 3 metallic legs in a cleared field. According to the couple's testimony, 3 humanoid figures, standing roughly 5 feet tall and clad in seamless, tight-fitting yellow suits that appeared to shimmer, emerged from the craft and began moving towards them with a quote-unquote gliding gait. That's almost entirely menacing, except for the yellow jumpsuits. I don't know why, it just kind of takes away a little bit for me. But anyway, aye aye, Captain Yellow Shirt. De Souza, an experienced woodsman who perceived the figures as a direct threat to his family, grabbed his Winchester .44 rifle and fired a single shot at the lead entity. The retaliation was instantaneous and technologically precise. Before de Souza could chamber a second round, the craft emitted a pencil-thin beam of emerald green light that struck him squarely in the center of the chest. The impact didn't produce a traditional kinetic wound, but de Souza described a sensation of quote-unquote numbing heat before he was thrown backwards and rendered unconscious. His wife, Maria, reported that the 3 entities immediately retreated into the craft, which ascended vertically at a silent, impossible speed, leaving behind a burnt circular indentation in the soil and a lingering smell of quote-unquote burnt ozone that caused Maria to suffer from immediate nausea and vertigo. The clinical decline of Inácio de Souza began less than 48 hours after the encounter. He was rushed to a hospital in Goiânia, aced it, Goiânia, where he was treated by Dr. Gualberto Marquez. The physical symptoms were horrific. De Souza developed deep circular skin lesions on his chest and back that mirrored the entry and exit points of a high-energy particle beam. Within a week, began to exhibit the classic signs of acute radiation poisoning, including persistent vomiting, the loss of all body hair, and the appearance of large purple blotches or purpura across his limbs. Most baffling to Dr. Marquez was the blood work. D'Souza had developed a hyper-aggressive form of malignant leukemia almost overnight. Leukemia lasers, Linda. His white blood cell count plummeted to a near zero level, indicating that his bone marrow had been fundamentally destroyed or vitrified by the green light. The fatal outcome was reached on October 11, 1967, less than 60 days after the sightings. D'Souza, who had been a robust and athletic man of only 37 years old, withered away to a skeletal 80 pounds before his organs finally failed. Dr. Marquez noted in his final medical summary that the patient's body appeared to have been, quote, cooked from the inside out, unquote, by a localized, high-intensity radiation source that bypassed the skin's surface to target the vital blood-producing centers of the skeletal system. The case was investigated by the Brazilian Air Force's SIOANI, or System for the Investigation of Unidentified Aerial Objects, but the findings remain largely classified, leaving Inácio de Souza's death as a grim warning of the lethal capabilities of, quote-unquote, the light in the South American interior. Now, I find it also interesting that all the way back in 1967, Brazil had an Air Force subsection called the System for the Investigation of Unidentified Aerial Objects. Quite telling. I don't think, other than Project Blue Book, which, and Grudge and Sign before that, like an American equivalent, but those were more, I could see those being more public relations organizations more than anything else, like actual, like legitimate investigation. But I'm sure that if there was any actual official body of intentional and intense investigation into this phenomenon, probably something that's deep in the vaults. So, moving on. Next, we've got the Chilca brain drain encounters, quote-unquote brain drain encounters, spanning from the mid-1970s through the late 1990s. It transformed the coastal desert of Chilca, Peru, located approximately 60 miles south of Lima, from a popular UFO spotting destination to a zone of documented neurological terror. While the area had long been associated with the peaceful contactee movements of the Mission Rama groups, a darker series of events began involving local night watchmen and industrial guards at the Chilca power plants and local salt mines. Now, just real quick, as a quick aside for those unfamiliar, Mission Rama, originally Mission Rama, spelled differently, they changed it from R-A-M-A to R-A-H-M-A. It was a Peruvian UFO contactee, well, I hesitate to use the word cult. Let's go with organization. How about that? That's more fair and balanced. A UFO contactee organization and quote-unquote cosmic mission, founded in Lima, Peru in 1974 by author and lecturer Sixto Paz Wells, who I believe is still alive and doing a lot of, writing a lot of books, doing a lot of investigations still. The group is built around the claim that its members have established telepathic and physical contact with a group of benevolent extraterrestrial guides from Ganymede, the moon of Jupiter, as well as other star systems. Judging by the incidents that I'm reporting on now, they don't seem all that benevolent. But hey, that's just me. Yeah, I don't know. This episode almost very closely turned into another installment in the Occult Crime Atlas, but because the attacks and interactions with these seemingly high-tech or quote-unquote alien flying humanoids, etc., took place all over Central and South America, it kind of boosts me out of that. But there will be a return in which I plan to more fully in-depth explore various cults, UFO groups, and ritual murders, etc., in various places in South America. But just as a quick note for those interested in that series, I got a big one coming up. And it's not in South America, but it's going to be... It's a big one. Anyway, moving on back to the killer UFOs. Witnesses reported being intercepted by, quote, tall, glowing shadows, unquote. Bipedal entities standing over 7 feet tall that appeared to lack solid mass flickering like television static. That is particularly unsettling to me for some reason. These entities didn't use traditional light beams. Instead, they emitted a low-frequency thrumming vibration so intense that it could be felt in the victim's teeth and their chest cavities before causing an immediate loss of motor control. Find that a lot, too. Feeling certain noises, even if they're not loud noises necessarily, but feeling noises in the chest cavity. And what may have been a potential, I don't know, a cryptid or something other encounter that I had a while back with some kind of owl type creature. It may have just been a big fucking owl. But if it was an owl, it was a big fucking owl. Because the noises it made resonated in my chest. It was, oh God, it was, I don't know, it was like both, it's like when you look at mountains and you're like, you know, it's like, oh, that's beautiful, but it's also like kind of scary, like the majesty of it, and just like, man, I'd fucking hate to get stuck out here with these mountains. I don't know, just the awe-inspiring nature of, well, nature, etc. Anywho, the neurological trauma inflicted during these encounters was uniquely devastating compared to other South American cases. Victims were frequently found wandering the desert dunes hours or days later in a hollowed-out cognitive state, exhibiting a total loss of, I guess, what you could call autobiographical memory, as well as the inability to recognize even their own families. Medical evaluations conducted at regional clinics in Cañete and Lima documented a consistent physiological signature. Victims suffered from sudden, violent nosebleeds that originated deep within the sinus cavities, and a temporary but profound blindness caused by the rupturing of ocular capillaries. Most chilling were the reports of permanent amnesia, where survivors described a sensation of their thoughts being pulled through a straw, quote unquote. That was how one of the victims described it, and holy shit. No thanks. It left them with a vacant stare and a diminished capacity for complex speech. I can sympathize with a diminished capacity for complex speech. The shadow harvest, as it came to be known, is a term used by local residents to describe the condition of the survivors, who were often found in a catatonic state near the quote-unquote energy vortex sites of Mount Lapa. Clinical follow-ups and brain imaging performed on several guards, such as one Luis M., a veteran security officer who vanished for 48 hours in 1988, revealed unexplained mineral deficiencies, specifically a total depletion of magnesium and lithium in the blood. Quite odd that all the lithium is missing from their bodies, as that is one of the primary elements that all of these illegal mining operations are going after. Forensic neurologists noted the presence of cerebral scarring or microlesions in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex. These injuries were described as being consistent with exposure to a localized high-intensity electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, directed with pinpoint accuracy at the human skull, effectively wiping the neural pathways responsible for memory and identity. The Chilca incident remains a focal point for researchers investigating directed energy weapons, or DEW, and gray zone intelligence operations. The precision of the quote-unquote brain drain effects led many to believe that the glowing shadows were not biological extraterrestrials, but possibly clandestine field tests of non-lethal neurotechnologies. Once again, psychotronics. To this day, the Chilca Desert remains a site of high alert for local authorities, as the quote-unquote shadows are still occasionally reported by those who venture too close to the industrial perimeters at night, leaving behind a legacy of men who return from the dunes as empty shells of their former selves. We've also got the UFO-induced fatalities of the Sierra Nevada, occurring throughout 2012 in the isolated, high-altitude regions of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, Colombia, which represents a rare and devastating intersection of unidentified aerial phenomena and environmental mass casualty events. The Arhuaco, or Ica people, a highly spiritual indigenous group who serve as the traditional guardians of the mountain, began reporting a persistent presence of quote-unquote silent spheres, metallic or translucent orbs roughly 5 to 10 feet in diameter that would hover at low altitudes over sacred sites and small family settlements. Unlike traditional sightings that involve movement, These spheres remained static for hours, emitting a low-frequency hum that vibrated the very stones of the village foundations. Within weeks of these prolonged stationary vigils, the ARQUIVO spiritual leaders, or mamos, reported a terrifying spike in sudden infant deaths and a wasting sickness that targeted the community's elders, characterized by extreme lethargy, hair loss, and the yellowing of the skin. The environmental toxicity documented at these hovering sites was unlike any natural or industrial pollution known in the region. When the independent investigators and local environmental health teams reached the remote settlements, they discovered quote-unquote dead zones or localized burn rings directly beneath where the spheres had been sighted. The soil within these 10-meter circles had been rendered completely sterile, with all microbial and insect life incinerated. Most remarkably, the surrounding high-altitude vegetation had been vitrified. The extreme localized heat had literally melted the silica within the plants and soil, turning the flora into a brittle, blackened glass. I've also heard of other strange, unknown, undocumented elements or glass-like residue being found at a lot of different UAP landing sites, etc. Tests conducted on soil samples revealed unnatural concentrations of heavy metals, including lead and mercury, that seem to have been precipitated out of the air during the object's presence, effectively poisoning the village water sources and local crops overnight. The biological impact on the ARQUIVO survivors provided a clinical map of high-energy exposure. Dozens of villagers reported a persistent metallic taste in their mouths, a hallmark system of high-frequency microwave or ionizing radiation exposure, as well as a debilitating high-pitched ringing in their ears that led to permanent hearing loss. The mysterious illness among the elders was later identified by field doctors as rapid-onset organ failure, specifically targeting the kidneys and the liver, consistent with acute heavy metal poisoning or the cellular breakdown caused by intense electromagnetic fields. At least 4 elders and 3 infants died during the peak of these sightings, their bodies showing signs of internal desiccation or extreme dehydration that occurred despite adequate water intake. 2012 Sierra Nevada fatalities remain a sensitive topic for the Colombian government and the Global Heritage Fund, as the ARQUIVO continue to claim that the quote-unquote silent spheres were not merely craft, but quote-unquote extractions by entities seeking the mountain's unique mineral properties. The events have left the region with a legacy of fear and sterile scars on the mountain face where nothing has grown for over a decade. The precision of the vitrification and the selective biological toll on the most vulnerable members of the community suggests that these spheres were utilizing a high-energy propulsion or scanning system that was fundamentally incompatible with human life. Beyond the cases in the Brazilian interior and the Peruvian highlands, South America's quote-unquote danger zone extend into the high Andes and the coastal deserts, where encounters are often characterized by extreme thermal energy and unexplained biological extraction. These accounts, often supported by local police and or military reports, highlight a recurring theme of physiological devastation following contact with unknown entities. The thermal attack on the Santana brothers occurred on the night of February 12, 1982, in the rural, Araraquara region in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Fucking nailed it! It remains a benchmark case for directed energy weapons, or DEW injuries in UAP history. While driving their utility vehicle near a sprawling remote sugarcane plantation, brothers Benedito and Genivaldo Santana observed a metallic, disc-shaped craft hovering silently less than 50 feet above the roadway. As the vehicle's engine and headlights abruptly failed, like they always do, a classic electromagnetic interference symptom, or EMI, the craft emitted a concentrated, pulsating beam of ruby-red light that bathed the car's interior. The brothers reported that the light didn't just illuminate the cabin, but felt like a, quote, physical blow of fire, unquote, instantly superheating the air and the metal surfaces around them. The injuries sustained by the brothers were categorized by emergency room physicians in Araraquara as high-energy radiation trauma. Benedito, who was positioned closer to the driver's side window, suffered third-degree burns across 15% of his upper body. Most baffling to the attending medical staff was the geometry of these injuries. The burns were arranged in a precise grid-like pattern, suggesting the light beam was structured or modulated in a way that bypassed the skin surface to cauterize deeper subcutaneous tissue in a mathematical lattice pattern. Suggesting the light beam was structured or modulated in a way that bypassed the skin surface to cauterize deeper subcutaneous tissues in a mathematical lattice. Forensic investigators noted that while Benedito's skin was charred in this grid, his cotton shirt remained largely unburned, implying a high-frequency microwave or maser, which is a microwave amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, but a microwave or maser source that targeted biological water molecules rather than any flammable fabrics. The medical decline of Ginovaldo Santana provided an even more disturbing look at the weapon's neurological impact. Struck directly in the face by the pulsating beam, Ginovaldo suffered permanent retinal scarring. His maculae were effectively bleached or vitrified by the intensity of the light, leaving him legally blind within minutes. In the weeks following the attack, he developed a sudden onset of violent neurological tremors and motor control loss identical to advanced Parkinson's disease. We got leukemia lasers and Parkinson's pulse rays. Neurologists theorized that the pulsating nature of the beam had acted as an infrasonic or microwave pulse that permanently disrupted the, dopaminergic pathways of the brain. A lot of this quote-unquote non-lethal weaponry, is it's a billion fucking times worse than lethal weaponry. Not to be confused with the Mel Gibson, Danny Glover franchise. Local police files from the Local police files from the Araraquara Civil Police Station provided the final grounded confirmation of the event's physical reality. Upon inspecting the brothers' vehicle, officers found that the heavy-gauge metal roof had been, quote-unquote, partially warped and distorted, as if placed in an industrial forge. However, the interior headliner and the plastic upholstery showed no signs of scorching or melting. This indicated a highly localized and frequency-specific heat source that interacted exclusively with the conductive properties of the metal and biological tissues of the passengers. The Santana case remains a chilling example of an encounter where the quote-unquote UFO functioned less like a vehicle and more like a deployed weapons system, leaving the brothers physically and neurologically shattered for the remainder of their lives. There's also the Strange Sentinels of Fort Itaipu, occurring on the night of November 4th, 1957 in Praia Grande, Brazil. It's one of the most significant military UAP engagements in South American history due to its high-level diplomatic and clinical fallout. During the height of the Cold War, two elite sentinels stationed at the coastal Fort Itaipu observed a brilliant, glowing orange object, roughly 100 feet in diameter, descending silently towards the fort's stone ramparts. As the soldiers instinctively raised their M1 Garand rifles to challenge the intruder, the object emitted a rhythmic, low-frequency humming vibration that resonated through their gear and boots. The Sentinels reported a sudden total loss of motor control, describing a state of muscular paralysis that left them frozen in place as the object hovered mere meters above them. The physiological impact was instantaneous and agonizing. Both soldiers were bathed in an invisible wave of intense, dry heat that bypassed the cool sea air. One sentinel lost consciousness almost immediately as his internal body temperature spiked, while the second soldier reportedly began to scream in a state of delirium. Witnesses from the barracks later claimed they could hear his cries over the mechanical hum of the craft. Most graphically, the screaming soldier's heavy wool uniform began to smolder and char directly against his skin, despite the absence of an open flame or external ignition source. The heat appeared to be, quote-unquote, internalized, targeting the moisture in the fabric and the soldier's biological tissues simultaneously. When the relief guard arrived minutes later, they found both sentinels in a state of total physiological shock, suffering from deep second and third degree thermal burns that covered their chests and arms. The fort's entire electrical infrastructure, including the heavy-duty searchlights and radio arrays, had been catastrophically fried, with the copper wiring found melted inside the conduits. Most notably, the soldiers' mechanical watches had been permanently magnetized. Their internal gears were all fused together. The Brazilian army, recognizing the gravity of the technological breach, requested immediate assistance from the U.S. military, who sent quote-unquote observers and medical specialists from the Panama Canal Zone. The secret joint investigation concluded that these sentinels had been exposed to a massive, directed dose of electromagnetic radiation, likely in the microwave or maser spectrum. The event caused a temporary state of emergency at the fort, with the Brazilian High Command briefly fearing a Soviet secret weapons test. However, the silent, gravity-defying maneuvers of the orange craft led investigators to categorize the incident as a non-terrestrial, hostile encounter. The Fort Itaipu case remains a foundational precedent for the theory that UAP quote-unquote defense mechanisms are designed to neutralize biological and electrical threats with surgical, high-energy efficiency. Next up, we've got the Atacama humanoid extraction. Occurring in May 1997 in the desolate high-altitude desert near the mining hub of Calama, Chile. It represents one of the most chilling and forensics-heavy cases of human mutilation linked to unidentified phenomena. The event began when Luis Covarrubias, a seasoned shepherd known for his intimate knowledge of the rugged terrain, failed to return to his settlement after a routine day tending to his flock. Despite a massive search effort by local volunteers and the Carabineros, or Chilean National Police, Covarrubias remained missing for 72 hours. When his body was finally discovered in a remote ravine, the physical state of the remains sent shockwaves through the local community. Despite having been missing for only 3 days in the cold Andean air, his corpse appeared quote-unquote mummified and leathery, as if it had been subjected to an industrial-scale preservation process or extreme targeted dehydration. The forensic anomalies documented during the subsequent autopsy at the Calama Medical Examiner's office were described by local investigators as quote-unquote medically impossible, under natural circumstances. The coroner found that Covarrubias' body had been entirely drained of all blood and internal soft tissues, including the brain, heart, and liver, through 3 small, perfectly circular incisions located in the neck near the carotid artery and the groin near the femoral artery. Yikes. Most disturbingly, there was no evidence of blood spatter or biological struggle at the scene. The edges of the circular wounds were not jagged or torn by scavengers. Instead, they showed signs of high-heat cauterization, suggesting that a laser-like surgical instrument had sealed the capillaries as it moved through the skin, preventing any leakage during the quote-unquote extraction process. The vitrified ground at the exact site where Covarrubias was last seen provided the final technological proof of an external high-energy intervention. Investigators from the Carabineros discovered a precise 10-meter circle of vitrified sand where the desert's silica had been flash-fried to temperatures exceeding 1700 Celsius or 3000 Fahrenheit, turning the Earth into a brittle, translucent layer of volcanic-like glass. With this burn ring, the soil was rendered sterile, and the remaining sheep in Covarrubias' flock were found huddled in a state of catatonic shock and refused to move from the spot for days. Local UFO hunters and forensic experts noted that the heat required to create such a pattern would have necessitated a massive energy source, yet there were no tracks of heavy machinery or fuel residue found anywhere in the vicinity. The Atacama case is frequently compared by researchers to the chupacabra hysteria of the same era, but the Calama police reports highlights a level of quote-unquote industrial and clinical precision that points towards a highly advanced, potentially non-biological collector. The event remains a dark landmark in Chilean history, as the quote-unquote mummified state of the victim and the vitrification of the desert floor suggests that Covarrubias was not merely killed, but processed by a force that utilized the Atacama's isolation to conduct a lethal biological harvest without interference. Next up is the sighting and death of Arcesio Bermudez, occurring on the night of July 4th, 1969 in the rural town of Analima, Colombia. That's what I'm going with. It's regarded by researchers like Jacques Vallée as one of the most clinically significant and lethal UAP encounters in South American history. The event began when several members of the Bermudez family observed a small luminous object, described as a glowing amber-colored sphere roughly 6 feet in diameter. They watched it land in a remote field on their farm. Arcesio Bermudez, a very healthy and highly respected 53-year-old landowner, decided to investigate the intruder. Armed with only a flashlight, he approached the object while his family watched from a distance. Upon reaching a range of less than 15 feet, Bermudez reportedly attempted to quote-unquote signal or touch the craft with the beam of his flashlight, which triggered an immediate and violent technological response. The interaction was instantaneous and devastating. The craft emitted a brilliant blue flash or high-energy discharge that struck Bermudez directly, knocking him backwards several feet. Witnesses reported that the object then ascended vertically at an incredible speed, vanishing into the night sky. While Bermudez initially appeared just merely stunned, his physical condition underwent a horrific transformation within less than 2 hours. He began to vomit dark, oxidized blood and fell into a state of profound physiological shock, characterized by uncontrollable cold sweats and a total loss of motor coordination. His skin reportedly took on a waxy, translucent appearance, and he complained of an intense, quote-unquote, metallic taste in his mouth, which is a apparently classic symptom of high-dose ionizing radiation exposure. The fatal conclusion was reached after Bermudez was rushed to a specialist hospital in Bogota. Upon admission, medical staff were baffled by his clinical profile. Despite the tropical climate and his internal distress, Bermudez's core temperature had dropped to a lethal 35 degrees Celsius, or 95 Fahrenheit. Nurses reported that his skin felt ice cold to the touch, and his temperature refused to rise even when he was placed under multiple high-wattage thermal blankets. He lingered in a state of semi-consciousness for 2 days, his internal organs systematically failing as his blood failed to clot. He died on July 6, 1969. While the official medical report cited, quote, acute gastroenteritis, unquote, to avoid any public panic, the symptoms, including the rapid destruction of his white blood cell count and the cold death, were identified by secondary investigators as identical to lethal gamma radiation poisoning. The Bermudez case remains a cornerstone of Colombian ufology, as it provided a rare opportunity for medical professionals in a major city to document the rapid biological breakdown caused by a UAP defense mechanism. The fact that the craft reacted specifically when Bermudez pointed his own light source at it suggests a highly reactive, automated security system that interpreted his curiosity as a threat. To this day, the Analima incident serves as a grim reminder that even a small craft can carry a lethal, high-energy payload capable of extinguishing human life in a matter of hours. Now, why, oh why, dear listeners, would South America, of all places, prove to be the site of what are exceptionally violent, brutal, and downright oftentimes homicidal encounters with humanoids, aliens, and UFOs, etc.? Could there be some underlying reason, some unspoken of unifying thread that connects much of this intracontinental high strangeness? Well, maybe. But to answer that, or at the very least, reach some type of hypothetical subtext to much of this weirdness that at the very least somewhat resembles something kind of sort of like an answer, we're going to have to take a look back, all the way back, to a little event that the history books like to call World War II. By the way, should you, for whatever reason, happen to inexplicably travel back in time to approximately the World Wars era, maybe don't number them if you end up talking to the locals. It probably tends to demoralize them a bit. Anyway, Easel, moving on.
Think we's a little Jews? No, we think that Jews.
The theory that Nazi remnants or clandestine breakaway civilizations are responsible for high-tech lethal encounters in South America is a staple of the quote-unquote gray zone historiography. This narrative suggests that the otherworldly brutality seen in the Andes and the Amazon is not extraterrestrial, but rather the result of advanced Nazi aerospace projects, often termed Die Glocke or the Bell, or at least they fall under the same umbrella as this research. All of which were relocated to the southern hemisphere via rat lines following the collapse of the Third Reich. According to this theory, the brutal extractions and radiation-based attacks are the byproduct of continued human experimentation and the defense of isolated high-tech fortifications in the deep jungle or on the Antarctic fringe. One of the most grounded and truly horrific precedents for this theory is found in Colonia Dignidad, now called Villa Baviera, in Chile. Established in 1961 by former Nazi medic Paul Schaefer.
Yeah. Here are the lyrics. These are the lyrics. Down in Melbourne, FLA, some jerk named Bill is ripping me off. And don't you know now, my lawyers say legally, that Bill's house and car belong to me. Yeah. There you go.
Not that one. No, this one is decidedly far nastier, and he hardly ever, if at all, came up with wacky little tunes on the keyboard for the entertainment of the late night with David Letterman audience. This 30,000-acre fenced enclave operated as a state within a state. Declassified Chilean intelligence reports and survivor testimonies from the 1970s and 80s revealed that the colony was a hub for advanced electronic surveillance, weapons manufacturing, and chemical testing. Locals in the surrounding Maule region, that's what I'm going with, Maule region, frequently reported strange lights and silent aircraft hovering over the colony. Some researchers suggested that the quote-unquote humanoid attacks in the region were actually Schaefer's security forces utilizing experimental German night vision and silent propulsion technology to enforce a no-man's land around their secret labs, where they allegedly assisted the Pinochet regime in disappearing political prisoners, quote-unquote disappearing political prisoners, through horrific medical torture. When it comes to Colonia Dignidad, I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg. There are actual, if you want to talk about, potential ritualized abuse of women and children, this is probably, there's a good bet that a lot of that took place here. Shit got fucking bonkers at this place. It's really, really bad. I don't even want to, it's bad. Just, but if you're interested, there's probably something fucking wrong with you. No, I'm kidding. Just look into it because it's fucking horrific. I suggest checking out Peter Levinda's book. I believe it's called Ratlines, but a lot of his stuff on the Nazi diaspora post-World War II is worth checking out. There's also the Project Paperclip of the South, Bariloche and the Nahuel Huapi. In Bariloche, Argentina, a known haven for high-ranking Nazis like Erich Priebke and Reinhard Kopps, there have been decades of reports concerning UFO activity over Lake Nahuel Huapi. The Nazi UFO theory posits that German scientists who escaped to Argentina continued their work on mercury vortex engines and torsion field physics. What was his name? Kammler? I forget his first name.
Hans Kammler.
But Kammler, a Nazi scientist who was working on their missile and aerospace defense, quote-unquote, defense programs. Kammler himself came up with a whole separate branch of physics because Einsteinian physics are, quote-unquote, Jewish physics. So obviously they weren't fucking having that. So Kammler came up with this whole other system of physics that departs wildly from everything that we know and use today in that field. So, I mean, the guy, Kammler himself, and various other physicists working on these programs, they weren't stupid. I mean, in the book smart sense. So who knows what eventual outcomes or findings and eventual inventions that these guys fucking came up with just by by shunning Einsteinian quote-unquote Jewish physics. It's I don't know, it's one of those shudder to think moments, really. But they were looking into mercury vortex engines and torsion field physics. The lethal nature of these encounters, characterized by the thermal beams and lethal radiation seen in cases like the 1982 Santana Brothers attack, is often attributed to the leakage of hazardous propellants and or the use of directed energy weapons to ward off curious locals. In this framework, the quote-unquote aliens are actually pilots in specialized pressure suits, and the quote-unquote disappearances are extractions for high-level intelligence or biological research conducted in underground facilities shielded by the rugged Andean geography. Then, of course, you've also got the Operation High Jump connection and the close proximity to Antarctica. A more expansive version of this theory links South American lethal encounters to a Nazi base in Newfoundland, Antarctica. Proponents argue that UFOs, quote-unquote UFOs, intercepted by the Brazilian Navy and the Chilean Air Force are craft originating from polar bases. The surgical and lethal precision of attacks, such as the 1997 Atacama mummification, is viewed as a form of clandestine resource gathering, both human and mineral, by a technologically superior but ethically bankrupt human faction. The silence of these craft is attributed to electromagnetic propulsion developed during the 1940s, which creates a vacuum around the craft, theoretically, muffling the sound but producing the vitrified ground and radiation burns found at landing sites. While mainstream historians view the Nazi UFO myth as a psychological byproduct of the Cold War, the persistence of German-speaking humanoids in local folklore across the southern cone remains a chilling and uncomfortably consistent detail. Plus, the whole Nordic aliens thing. I say it a lot. Just check out the book Closer Encounters by Jason Rezza-Georgiani. Sews everything up quite nicely. Actually, it's in my script here. I mentioned it again. Now, while an in-depth exploration of Nazi-themed ufology and the persistent presence of a particular subgroup of so-called extraterrestrial visitors, alarmingly and all too on-the-nose, Edley, referred to as Nordics, is in and of itself a highly intriguing topic. It's also a subject that at present happens to be far beyond the scope of this particular episode. However, having said that, once again, I cannot strongly enough recommend the book Closer Encounters by the brilliant author/philosopher Jason Rezza-Georgiani. It's undoubtedly the best, most concise, and well put together outline for the Nazi UFO hypothesis, weaving together pretty much all of the most pertinent threads into one uncomfortably snug sweater that makes all too much sense in the grand scheme of things. Moving on. So, remember when I mentioned psyops and aliens earlier? Well, there's actually one man in particular that provides an extremely strange example of this particular intersection. That man is one John Bosco, if that is indeed his real name. Spoiler, it's not. However, this man has most definitely taken a page from the classic psychological warfare weaponization of folklore straight out of the General Edward Lansdale playbook. The case of John Bosco Nedeljkovic, sometimes also spelled as Nedeljkovic, represents one of the most obscure yet frequently cited intersections of intelligence operations and the weaponization of Amazonian folklore. Nedeljkovic is often identified in deep state gray zone literature as a high-level psychological warfare specialist and intelligence operative. Reportedly active in South America during the latter half of the 20th century, his quote-unquote psyops are alleged to be the sophisticated modern-day successor to General Edward Lansdale's tactics. Specifically, the strategic use of quote-unquote alien or quote-unquote supernatural terror to facilitate land displacement and resource extraction. Now, information on Nedeljkovic is notoriously difficult to verify through standard public archives, which many researchers cite as evidence of his quote-unquote deep cover status. He's generally described as a polyglot of Eastern European descent with ties to U.S. intelligence and private military contractors, or PMCs. He's allegedly active from the 1970s through the late 1990s, with a specific focus on the Triple Frontier area, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and the Peruvian Amazon. Described as an expert in anthropological subversion, Nedeljkovic reportedly specialized in the mapping of indigenous superstitions to identify psychological levers that could be used to control or clear populations without the need for traditional military force. Some researchers speculate that he used the name John Bosco after the patron saint of magicians. Now, while the idea of a patron saint of magicians sounds a bit like a paradoxical oxymoron, this shit actually happened. St. John Bosco, 1815 to 1888, also known as Don Bosco, is officially recognized as the patron saint of magicians, illusionists, and entertainers. He was an Italian priest and founder of the Salesian order, or Salesian order. He was a skilled acrobat, juggler, and magician who used his talents to evangelize the youth of Turin. Now, if all these people who were out doing missionary work were this cool and entertaining, I'd at least listen. I'd check it out. As a young boy, John Bosco would attend local fairs and carnivals. The saint, the magician saint, John Bosco. He would attend local fairs and carnivals where he watched magicians in just utter rapt attention and later teaching himself their secrets and tricks. Illusions. He put on free shows for local children, incorporating sleight of hand tricks to capture their attention before repeating a Sunday homily or teaching a religious lesson. He was known for effects like turning pebbles into candy and linking ropes, which he used as a metaphor to explain the mystery of the Holy Trinity. In January 2002, hundreds of professional magicians from around the world petitioned Pope John Paul II to formally name St. John Bosco their patron. His feast day, January 31st, is now celebrated internationally as International Magic Day or World Magicians Day in his honor. Good gravy. He is also the patron saint of editors, publishers, apprentices, school children, and juvenile delinquents. This is a badass saint. I don't know. All these things sound cool. I wish I had discovered this guy earlier. In the context of more of this magical psyop type stuff, Bosco recorded over 150 prophetic dreams, including his famous Dream of the Two Columns, which warned of future trials for the Catholic Church. More to come. For over 30 years, Don Bosco was reportedly protected by a large, mysterious gray dog named Grigio that would appear out of nowhere whenever he was in physical danger from anti-clerical assassins and then vanish without a trace. Beyond stage magic, he was credited with real miracles, such as the multiplication of bread, that sounds familiar, stealing jokes, stealing acts, to feed hundreds of boys, and the restoration of sight to blind women. So, this is the man that our quote-unquote, I guess, villain, our antagonist, took his performance name, his stage name from. That's why he started calling himself John Bosco. Sort of a cynical operational joke, because that's how these intelligence operatives guys, they all have dark senses of humor and are largely fueled by Ivy League education, etc. That whole Yale thing. Moving on. This reflected his role as a master of illusion. Now we're talking about John Nedeljkovic, John Bosco Nedeljkovic now. So this reflected his role, or his, self-perceived role as a master of illusions and high-tech stagecraft in the jungle. So first of all, what an asshole, right? Secondly, not a word. That's so goddamn cool. That's because it essentially encapsulates everything I love and would want to do for a career myself. Except, I would use my powers for good, mostly. The whole Batman style, people need a symbol because a man can be killed, sort of inner city urban warfare equivalent of this dude. That's what I would want to be. But that's a thread I intend to tug on later when I'm alone. No, kidding, sort of. But that's a particular set of ideas I intend to later explore in podcast form when we'll be further investigating such topics as megalopolymancy, hot damn, got it in one, and the Fulcanelli mysteries, which are just part of something that keeps getting bigger and bigger, and I have to keep putting off as far as big topics and multi-part episodes or series go. But anyway, the core of the Nedeljkovic allegations involves the deliberate creation of quote-unquote technological monsters to protect clandestine mining or narcotics operations. The operational history of John Bosco Nedeljkovic in South America is frequently cited by deep cover researchers as the definitive blueprint for quote-unquote spectral warfare, the use of high-tech illusions to validate local superstitions for strategic gain. One of the most thoroughly detailed accounts of his alleged influence involves the, quote, Phantom of the Ucayali, unquote, operations during the mid-1980s. During this period, remote villages along the Ucayali River in Peru began reporting sightings of, quote, glowing, skinless giants, unquote. that could walk through walls and emit a paralyzing blue hum. Strange. That's how they described it. A blue hum. Perhaps there's some synesthesia going on. Synesthesia? Synesthesia, yeah. While the local population interpreted these as PELACARAS or demonic manifestations, intelligence analysts have pointed to a sophisticated area denial campaign orchestrated by Nedeljkovic's units. These teams allegedly utilized early prototype night vision compatible lasers and directional infrasound generators mounted on silent low altitude hovercraft. By quote unquote haunting these specific coordinates, Nedeljkovic ensured the land was vacated without the political paper trail of a traditional military eviction, allowing private extractors to move in under the cover of a quote unquote supernatural plague. Quick side note, taking into consideration some of what we've learned in our last episode on Ambrose Bierce and crossing over into this whole face peeler situation, I'm starting to think that maybe, just maybe, that the 1980s film Predator was a documentary filmed in real time. It also starred two future governors of American states, California and Minnesota specifically, one whose father was a Nazi, and the other one who has since become a well-known, quote-unquote, conspiracy theorist. Curiouser? Curiouser. That, and of course, all the so-called Glimmerman sightings reportedly occurring all around the world. Curiousest. As soon as I could dig up a cheap copy of the book Embodied Imaginations, I plan on doing some deep research on so-called fictions that have apparently decided to make appearances in our so-called real world, quote-unquote real world. I think somewhere along the lines of the Slender Man stabbings meets Alan Moore meeting John Constantine in a London pub. Anyways, a second, even more chilling exploration of the Nedeljkovic model allegedly involves the so-called chupacabra beta tests of the mid-1990s, which some researchers argue began as a highly controlled biological and psychological experiment in the Southern Cone, where Chile and Argentina sort of coned together, before spreading globally. Allegations suggest that Nedeljkovic's teams were testing the effectiveness of, quote, biomimetic drones, unquote. Small, silent, multi-legged aerial platforms equipped with surgical-grade suction and cauterization tools. Shades of the so-called organic black helicopters, perhaps. These devices were reportedly used to conduct, quote-unquote, simulated mutilations on livestock in rural provinces to observe how quickly a myth could destabilize a local economy and overwhelm rural police forces. Simulated mutilations, huh? What do they attack? A herd of tofu nasserai? I mean, if you're cutting that meat, it's not a simulated mutilation, but whatever. The Nedeljkovic signature in these events was the surgical precision of the wounds, identical to those found in the 1997 Atacama mummification case, which served to distract the public with alien hysteria while clandestine intelligence groups moved high-value assets across borders during the resulting chaos. The legacy of these operations suggests that John Bosco Nedeljkovic wasn't just a soldier, but a narrative architect, a warlord of story time, who understood that a bullet kills a man, but a monster story kills a culture's will to resist. So maybe take note of that, all the Epstein conspiracy theorists thinking he's fucking Dracula or some shit. These are people. They can be easily dealt with, as may or may not be the case with Epstein. In the Laredo and Madre de Dios regions, many elders still speak of the man who commanded the shadows, a tall, pale figure near military outposts who allegedly directed the flying lights with a handheld console. This figure, often identified as a Nedeljkovic-type operative, represents the terrifying fusion of advanced Western technology and ancient Amazonian fear, proving that the most effective way to hide a 21st century resource heist is to dress it in the skin of a 16th century demon. Today, the Nedeljkovic model is frequently invoked by critics of the Peruvian government's explanation for the 2023 to today ongoing PELACARAS attacks. While officials blame illegal miners with jetpacks, always causing problems, those guys. Deep state, quote-unquote deep state, or psyops researchers argue that the level of coordination and the silent nature of the tech points to a Nedeljkovic-style intelligence operation intended to clear the Nene River Basin for larger corporate interest in lithium and gold mining. which is somewhat ironic because I am fairly certain that a large number of the elite psychopaths at the top of the corporate world could use a heavy dose of lithium. John Bosco Nedeljkovic remains a ghost in the machine, a name synonymous with the terrifying possibility that the quote-unquote aliens hunting in the Amazon are actually human operatives using mythology as a tactical shroud. His last name is spelled Nedelcovic. Very interesting character. Hard to dig up information on, but interesting nonetheless. Now, aside from good old-fashioned mom-and-pop American psyops, there are certain pre-existing factors that somewhat lent an air of quote-unquote legitimacy, for lack of a better word, to the overarching alien invaders narrative, which came along with the violent encounters with these so-called face peelers. These were concepts and ideas that were possibly exploited in order to further fuel such a story. So the first thing we need to discuss is the Peruvian ritual landscape that makes the producers of Ancient Aliens get all hot and bothered. We need to take a quick and dirty look into the mysterious past and present surroundings of Peru, as well as the Triple Frontier area itself. Mysterious ruins and ritual landscapes of Peru and the Triple Frontier, where once again Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay meet, represents a sprawling 3,000-year-old architectural enigma that continues to baffle conventional archaeology. In Peru, the landscape is defined by quote-unquote impossible megalithic sites, such as, oh boy, here we go, Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and Machu Picchu, where stones weighing over 100 tons are fitted together with such quote-unquote molecular precision that even a razor blade cannot pass between them. These sites are not merely fortifications, but are part of a larger ritual geoglyph system, most famously represented by the Nazca lines. Stretching across 190 square miles of desert, these massive figures of monkeys, spiders, and geometric runways are only fully visible from the air, suggesting they were intended for celestial observers, or served as a sophisticated astronomical calendar of some kind. Further south, the Triple Frontier area is home to the Guarani Jesuits mission and subterranean tunnel systems, often linked to the legendary APRO, where local lore speaks of quote-unquote shining men who descended from the stars to teach the ancients how to manipulate stone like clay. For ancient alien theorists, hold on, let me say it right. Ancient alien theorists believe these landscapes provide compelling, quote-unquote, hard evidence because the engineering required to construct them ostensibly exceeds the known technological capacity of the Bronze and Iron Age cultures credited with their creation. Sites like Pumapunku in the Bolivian highlands near the Peruvian border feature H-shaped blocks with perfect 90-degree internal angles and drill holes that modern stonemasons claim would require diamond-tipped high-speed power tools. Theorists argue that the vitrified stone found at these ruins, where the rock has been flash melted into glass, is evidence of directed energy weaponry or thermal propulsion systems similar to those reported in modern PELACARAS encounters. The sheer scale of the lithic transport, that is, moving 100-ton blocks over 20 miles of mountainous terrain, suggests a mastery of anti-gravity or acoustic levitation, a technology that aligns perfectly with the low-frequency humming reported by witnesses in many 20th century UFO encounters. In an interesting aside, the current scientific and archaeological consensus as to just how these seemingly impossible monuments were built relies heavily upon the use of animal fat as a lubricant, while some of the more fringe theories posit the use of human fat as well, sometimes obtained via ritual sacrifice. Sort of a nice thematic synchronicity one will explore a bit more in depth in just a moment. The ritual aspect of these landscapes further fuels the extraterrestrial hypothesis, as many of these sites are built atop quote-unquote telluric energy hotspots, or geomagnetic anomalies. The Intihuatana stone at Machu Picchu, for instance, is believed by some to be a telecommunications device or cosmic hitching post of some kind. Theorists point to the reoccurring iconography of the Viracocha, a bearded, light-skinned deity of some kind who appeared in a craft, we'll call it, after a flood, as a historical record of an extraterrestrial visitor who imparted advanced knowledge of mathematics and engineering. In this view, the Triple Frontier and the Peruvian Andes are not just ruins, but a decommissioned spaceport and biological laboratory, where a superior intelligence once interacted with humanity, leaving behind a stone-cold blueprint of their presence that we are only now beginning to decode through the lens of modern physics. While there's no mainstream archaeological evidence that human fat was used as an industrial lubricant for moving megalithic stones, the theory persists in the darker fringes of Andean studies due to the cultural weight of the Pishtaco or fat stealer myth and the documented history of human sacrifice in the region. Mainstream science identifies llama fat or tallow and wet clay as the most likely lubricants used on wooden rollers and stone sleds to reduce friction when dragging 100-ton blocks. However, because the Inca and earlier cultures like the Moche viewed human fat as the literal life force or essence, the nira, they called it the nira, I believe that's how you say it, the life essence of a person. Some ethno-historians suggest that if human fat was ever present at these sites, it would have been most likely for ritual consecration purposes rather than any kind of mechanical utility. So in this context, the fat would be smeared on the stones to quote-unquote animate them, as the Inca believed that certain rocks were actually living beings or huacas that required nourishment to remain stable and protective. I believe a group of such huacas were often referred to as a huaca flaca. Is that something? Zoomers, did I make a funny? I made a funny! The practice of capacocha, or ritual child sacrifice. They went from dumb joke to ritual child sacrifice. So, 1-2 punch. Keep them guessing. This provides a chilling factual foundation for the human extraction parts of this theory. High-altitude mummies, such as the ice maiden Juanita, found on Mount Ampato, prove that the Inca performed highly controlled state-sanctioned killings to appease mountain deities. While these sacrifices were primarily intended to ensure fertile crops or successful military campaigns, some revisionist theories suggest that ritualized fat harvesting occurred during the construction of major temples to, quote-unquote, grease the wheels of cosmic order. This would link the ancient living stones of Sacsayhuaman directly to the modern PELACARAS accounts, suggesting that the fear of outsiders stealing human vitality to power their quote-unquote machinery is a trauma thousands of years in the making. The Triple Frontier area and the Guarani missions also have a legacy of fat extraction folklore, often tied to the Jesuit arrival. Another one of them groups. Just keep showing up. I don't know. Maybe where there's smoke, there's fire. You be the judge. Indigenous groups initially believed the Europeans used human fat to cast their massive church bells or lubricate the moving parts of their clocks and printing presses. This creates a terrifying loop of history, whether it was the Inca, quote-unquote, feeding the stones of Machu Picchu with sacrificial oils, or the modern illegal miners allegedly peeling faces to clear gold-rich land. The belief that human fat is a necessary fuel for, quote-unquote, great works, which is a constant, bloody thread in South American history. This suggests that even if the physics of the megaliths didn't require human fat, the metaphysics of the culture might have demanded it. The Peruvian megalithic ruins and ritual landscapes constitute a vast, high-altitude network of stone monuments that many researchers believe functions as a sophisticated terrestrial motherboard, designed to facilitate interstellar or even, possibly, interdimensional travel. Beyond the architectural brilliance, sites like Hayumarca and Lake Titicaca and the Naupa Huaca Shrine near, Ollantaytambo, feature quote-unquote blind doors. These are shallow T-shaped portals carved directly into solid andesite rock faces that lead, well, ostensibly nowhere. In the ancient alien and breakaway civilization frameworks, these are not merely symbolic religious icons, but are identified as stargates or stone portals that utilize the specific electromagnetic properties of the mountain's mineral veins. According to local Aymara legends, the Gate of the Gods, or Puya de Hayumarca, was used by a high priest named Amaru Muru, who utilized a golden disc to unlock the solid stone, stepping through a shimmering doorway to escape the Spanish conquistadors and never returning. The connection to the quote-unquote Stargate concept is reinforced by the geomagnetic anomalies and specific mineralogical compositions found at these sites. Peru sits atop some of the most intense telluric current intersections on Earth, where the planet's natural electrical charge is magnified by the high concentration of pink granite and crystalline quartz in the megalithic stones. Modern physicists, such as those exploring torsion field theory, suggest that the U-shaped and T-shaped niches found in these ruins could act as acoustic resonators or harmonic chambers. By chanting specific frequencies, often linked to the low-pitched hum reported in modern UFO encounters, it's theorized that the ancients could induce a piezoelectric effect in the stone, potentially thinning the veil between dimensions or creating a localized wormhole. Oof. I don't like that word. Wormhole. Ugh. Anyways, moving on. This would explain why PELACARAS and luminous spheres are so frequently reported hovering directly over these ancient portals. They may be utilizing the ruins as a refueling station or a navigational beacon anchored in the Earth's crust. I actually came across a book called Alien Energy, UFOs, Ritual Landscapes, and the Human Mind by Andrew Collins, author of Gateway to Atlantis. But it goes pretty in-depth into, I haven't read it all yet, but I know it goes pretty in-depth into the whole idea of plasma physics, as well as their interaction between ritual landscapes and certain minerals with various electromagnetic properties being found at these sites, various ritual landscapes, and even crop circle formations, etc. Pretty neat stuff, Furthermore, the astronomical alignment of these ritual landscapes suggests a long-range intent that points towards specific star systems, most notably Orion, Sirius, and the Pleiades. At the Coricancha, or Temple of the Sun in Cusco, the precision of the stone cutting is matched only by the mathematical accuracy of the windows and niches that align with the solstice sun and specific galactic coordinates. Theorists argue that these sites were built as cosmic arrival lounges, where the shining men, quote-unquote shining men of folklore, the Viracochas, would materialize after traveling through the Golden Gate. In this view, the Peruvian landscape is not a collection of dead ruins, but a dormant technological grid. The persistent 21st century reports of flying aliens and silent discs near these sites suggest that while the human operators are gone, the quote-unquote stargates themselves may still be active, waiting for the correct harmonic key to be turned once again. Another event which more or less was unfolding at approximately the same time as many of these recent PELACARAS attacks is something that, in addition to the mysterious and otherworldly pedigree of Peru's megalithic and ritual landscapes, may have either helped or hindered the, and once again, for lack of a better term, legitimacy, quote-unquote, of the alien invasion narrative behind these violent encounters. This, of course, was the discovery of the ancient Peruvian, quote-unquote, alien mummies. The discovery and subsequent investigation of the so-called alien mummies of Nazca began in late 2016 and early 2017, when a group of tomb raiders, or huaqueros, allegedly uncovered several mummified remains in a remote cave near the Nazca lines. These specimens, most notably the 3-fingered, 5-foot-tall humanoid named Maria, and several smaller reptilian-looking bodies like Alberto and Josefina, were brought to international attention by Mexican journalist Jaime Maussan. Initial visual inspections revealed startling anomalies: tridactyl or 3-fingered hands and feet, elongated skulls, and a lack of visible ears. The bodies were covered in a fine white powder identified as diatomaceous earth, not that other South American white powder that we're so familiar with, which served to preserve the organic tissues over centuries. This discovery immediately polarized the global community, with ancient alien theorists, take a shot, claiming they were proof of extraterrestrial visitation, and mainstream scientists labeling them as grotesque archaeological forgeries constructed from looted pre-Columbian human remains and animal bones. The timing of the quote-unquote alien mummy rollout has led many geopolitical analysts to view it as a massive ufological psyop intended to reinforce the PELACARAS narrative. By flooding the media with physical quote-unquote aliens from Peru's past, a psychological environment was created where rural communities were more likely to interpret modern illegal mining violence as a supernatural invasion. This narrative synchronization suggests that the mummies, whether real or fabricated, served as a cultural anchor for the alien explanation of the 2023 to present day attacks. If quote-unquote aliens had lived in Peru 1,000 years ago, it became much easier for the public to believe they were currently hovering over the Nene River with jetpacks. This distraction allowed the extraction of gold and lithium to proceed under a cloud of mythological confusion, effectively using the dead aliens to hide the living criminals. Despite the widespread dismissal by the World Congress of Mummy Studies, yep, that's a thing, which condemned the specimens as, quote, an irresponsible organized campaign of disinformation, unquote, there remains a core of unexplained scientific data that continues to fuel the mystery. Independent researchers and doctors from the San Luis Gonzaga National University of Ica, or UNICA, conducted CT scans and X-rays that revealed several anomalies. First up is the anatomical continuity. Some scans of Maria allegedly showed unbroken bone structures and vascular systems that would be nearly impossible to fake by grafting different skeletons together without leaving telltale surgical marks or adhesive residues. Then there's the DNA complexity. Initial DNA testing indicated a mix of human markers and quote-unquote unidentified genetic material. While critics argue this is simply due to ancient DNA degradation and contamination, proponents claim the quote-unquote unknown percentage is too high for a standard human mummy. And then there are the metallic implants. Perhaps the most baffling evidence involves these smaller specimens, which reportedly contain metallic chest plates composed of rare alloys, including osmium and silver. Mainstream science has yet to provide a definitive explanation for how or why a 1,000-year-old hoax would include high-purity rare earth metal implants integrated into the bone structure of a fabricated corpse. Today, the quote-unquote Nazca mummies remain in a legal and scientific limbo. In early 2024, Jaime Maussan presented 2 of the bodies to the Mexican Congress, leading to renewed calls for a global, transparent investigation. While the prevailing consensus remains that the bodies are sophisticated Franken mummies, IP crossover there, that were designed to profit from the lucrative alien market, so-called lucrative alien market. The presence of the non-human metallic alloys and the anatomical harmony of certain specimens keeps the debate alive. For the people of Peru, the mummies are no longer just artifacts. They are a physical extension of the PELACARAS terror, bridging the gap between an ancient, mysterious past and a violent, high-tech present. Taking into consideration the timing alone of these mummies being revealed to the world, in conjunction with much of Peru's enigmatic megalithic structures and ritual landscapes, much of the foundational layers of groundwork necessary to help fuel the alien invasion narrative behind the continuous attacks being perpetrated by these so-called face peelers has essentially been set. This may provide us with quite the useful microcosm of just such an alleged alien invasion event, which we'll explore more in depth in just a few moments. But there's just one more aspect of this whole rigmarole that I personally happen to find highly fascinating, and maybe some of you beautiful listeners will potentially see the conceptual significance of its connection to these ongoing PELACARAS attacks, and perhaps, quite possibly, just maybe, even end up connecting some of the dots and or threading the needles that I hadn't even noticed or paid any attention to when attempting to put this whole puzzle together. Now, for the sake of time, I hadn't really gotten too deep into the work of one Timothy Alberino, but he seems to be a guy that genuinely cares and wants to help these people out. That or he's an undercover CIA agent, but I hadn't really looked too deeply into the guy to make that particular judgment call yet. So I won't be including any of his research conducted while on an expedition into the affected areas. I will, however, be including a few resources towards the end for anyone interested in lending any sort of assistance possible to help these people defend themselves as well as maintain a semblance of regular everyday life by providing aid to the families of the men bravely defending their homes from just whatever, or more likely, just who or whomever is actually behind these despicable, cowardly attacks. As I mentioned, there is just one more aspect to all of these events which may or may not possibly provide us with another piece of the puzzle. That piece of the puzzle is ayahuasca tourism. Now, before we jump into that, I just want to say I had originally intended to kind of use this episode as a call to help to the cartels, actually, if anyone in the cartel listens to this, to help these people Because I would say it's sort of like a win-win. They could basically get themselves some good PR out of it, and then maybe get their hands on some high technology. I had basically included like various excerpts from the Kubark CIA enhanced interrogation / torture manual for them to use if they can catch one of these things. But it turns out that the cartels are pretty much wrapped up in all this too. And then I was hoping that when I was looking into I did a cursory check into the Timothy Alberino stuff, and I was like, man, I hope this dude brought fucking rocket launchers for these people. But apparently there's something called the Leahy Law.
He who looks into the abyss realizes that there's nothing looking back at him. The abyss, the shit abyss.
That prohibits people from lending, at least private citizens, I guess, from lending armed material assistance to people in other countries. Didn't know that. Very strange. But they put a "don't drink this" on the Windex because basically somebody, drank it. So that's why they're there. Anywho, the world of ayahuasca tourism has transformed the Peruvian Amazon from a secluded spiritual frontier to a high-stakes psychedelic mecca, attracting thousands of Western seekers, Silicon Valley executives, and tech bros annually to centers in Iquitos and Pucallpa. I think it's either Pucallpa or Pucallpa, Pucallpa. I'm going to go with Pucallpa because I'm told that 2 L's makes a Y. Anyway, this industry centers on the consumption of a DMT-rich brew that frequently induces visions of mechanical elves, insectoid doctors, and shining metallic cities. Hallucinations that bear a striking superficial overlap with the physical descriptions of PELACARAS and UAP occupants. Both experiences involve high-tech entities performing surgeries or scanning the witnesses with light. Isn't it ironic, don't you think? This cultural saturation has created a dangerous feedback loop. In regions where Westerners are paying thousands of dollars to, quote-unquote, meet the aliens in a trance, the local population is simultaneously reporting physical, violent encounters with armored, light-emitting figures. This has led some investigative theorists to propose a cynical corporate extraction hypothesis, that wealthy tech interests, having mapped the region's resources during luxury retreats, may be deploying private security teams equipped with prototype exoskeletons or silent propulsion gear to clear land for lithium or rare earth mining under the convenient cover of local, quote-unquote, alien hysteria. I could so very easily see the Joe Rogan sphere, billionaire, trillionaire, tech bro, transhumanist death cult guys going out on some ayahuasca retreat and saying, like, this is beautiful land. I am so connected to this beautiful land. It looks like a really great place to exploit. Maybe I'll use my back alley channels to gather up some corporate goons with high technology and send them out to exploit this area, etc. The Sebastian Woodruff incident took place in April 2018. Serves as the most violent and well-documented example of how this intersection of tourism, exploitation, and the PELACARAS paranoia can turn lethal. Woodruff, a 41-year-old Canadian citizen, had traveled to the Ucayali region, specifically to study plant medicine. But his behavior quickly devolved into what locals described as erratic, entitled, and predatory. Woodruff became obsessed with Olivia Arevalo Lomas, a revered 81-year-old Shipibo Konibo shaman and human rights defender. On April 19th, 2018, one day before 420, look out, Woodruff allegedly confronted Arevalo at her home in the community of Victoria Gracia, demanding a healing ritual that she had previously refused him. Eyewitnesses claim Woodruff shot the elderly shaman multiple times, killing her instantly. In the immediate aftermath, the community, already on high alert due to rumors of organ harvesters and face peelers operating in the area, viewed Woodruff not merely as a murderer, but as a physical manifestation of the predatory outsider. The eventual lynching that followed was a brutal expression of collective justice fueled by decades of PELACARAS trauma. Within hours of Arevalo's death, a mob of villagers tracked Woodruff down. A disturbing mobile phone video, which later circulated globally, showed Woodruff being dragged by a rope around his neck while pleading for his life. He was beaten and strangled to death in the mud. His body later found buried in a shallow grave near the community. The Peruvian authorities and international media initially framed the event as a tragic clash of cultures. But that's one hell of an understatement. But local activists argued that Woodruff's actions mirrored the extractive behavior of the PELACARAS narrative, a foreign entity arriving with superior firepower to harvest the spiritual or physical essence of the indigenous people. This cycle of psychedelic colonialism suggests that the tech bro influence in the Amazon is not merely limited to spiritual tourism, but has tangible, often violent territorial consequences. If covert corporate goons are indeed using advanced tech to mimic quote-unquote aliens, they're operating in a landscape where the line between a DMT vision and a private military operation has become dangerously blurred. The lynching of Sebastian Woodruff stands as a grim warning that in the Amazon, the monsters are no longer just myths. They are perceived as literal, living, breathing threats that the community is prepared to eliminate with the same industrial finality used by the extractors themselves. The ongoing PELACARAS incidents in the Peruvian Amazon serve as a potent microcosm for a much larger global alien invasion narrative, specifically one that mirrors the mechanics of Project Bluebeam. While the local population in Alto Nene reports 7-foot-tall beings with hovering shoes and yellowish eyes attacking their villages, the official Peruvian government explanation that these are simply illegal gold miners using commercial jetpacks has only deepened the suspicion that a highly coordinated psychological operation is underway. This scenario demonstrates how a localized terror can be used as a testing ground for area denial tactics, where advanced, non-public technology is disguised as a supernatural or extraterrestrial threat to clear land and manipulate public perceptions. By aliasing human military or corporate activity as an alien presence, the PELACARAS events provide a functional blueprint for how a global state could eventually justify authoritarian control under the pretext of a unified response to a quote-unquote non-human enemy. Project Bluebeam, for those unfamiliar, is a multi-phased conspiracy theory first proposed by the Canadian journalist Serge Monast in the 1990s. It posits that a New World Order, often linked to NASA and the United Nations, those horrific organizations. Well, NASA is pretty fucking shady. United Nations, I think they're just... they're trying, but they're pretty much up shit creek with a turd for a paddle. Anyways, they intend to abolish traditional religions and national identities to establish a unified global government. The project allegedly involves 4 distinct stages designed to destabilize reality itself. Step 1, the breakdown of archaeological knowledge. Orchestrated earthquakes, quote-unquote, would discover, quote-unquote, discover artifacts that supposedly prove existing religious doctrines are false. Read the Stargate conspiracy, and it kind of explores this idea a little bit further, but the prominence and just widespread presence of the whole ancient aliens idea and narrative, like the way it's exploded in the last couple decades, kind of the equivalent base to this, I would say. Potentially, allegedly. So step 2 is the space show. Utilizing satellite-based holographic technology, massive 3D images of regional deities or savior figures would be projected globally into the sky, simulating a quote-unquote second coming or a massive alien arrival. Now, the religious iconography idea, that's kind of fucking stupid. I don't know. But an alien invasion, that's a little more, I don't know. I could see more people buying into it. It would be weird as fuck and kind of just nonsensical if Jesus, Muhammad, even though, you can't, he's an iconographic figure. I don't know, Buddha, Vishnu, whoever. If all these different religious figures appeared in the sky over different areas at the same time, I don't know, that idea seems a little, it's messy, it's unwieldy, but that's my own, that's what I would go with. Step 3, direct mind control. Utilizing low frequency or ELF waves to create quote-unquote telepathic communication, people would believe they are hearing the voice of God or an alien intelligence directly in their heads. Step 4 is the staged invasion and subsequent supernatural, quote-unquote supernatural events. A fake alien invasion or supernatural crisis would be triggered to throw the world into a state of panic, forcing humanity to plead for a centralized authority, the New World Order, to step in and save the planet. In the vein of Project Bluebeam, the PELACARAS encounters act as a quote-unquote beta test for how effectively a population could be neutralized by a narrative they are culturally conditioned to fear. Some researchers, such as the aforementioned Timothy Alberino, have argued that the entities in Peru, who reportedly speak Spanish with quote-unquote native or English accents, they've repeatedly been referred to as gringos by many people, the indigenous people, as well as various commenters, and specifically the victims. The little girl I mentioned earlier, probably the one who got the most direct intelligence interacting with these things, and she said that one spoke English and the other spoke sort of a regional dialect of Spanish or Portuguese. I forget which one. But yeah, they probably fucked up protocol and ended up talking in front of her because they didn't think she was going to get away. But, screwed the pooch on that one. It's one of the largest reasons we know that, aliens aren't, they're going to be doing click-clacks and ding-dongs and hums and whistles and shit like that. I don't know. Nothing that sounds like what you would classify as a gringo. Anywho, moving on. Alberino says that these native or English-speaking accented people belong to a secret human organization testing reverse-engineered or cutting-edge military hardware. And this aligns perfectly with the Bluebeam concept of using the quote-unquote sky as a screen and the ground as a stage. The recent surge in mystery drone sightings across the United States in late 2024 has further reignited these theories, with commentators suggesting that quote-unquote drones are merely the latest iteration of the holographic or robotic masks used to lay the groundwork for a broader orchestrated apocalyptic scenario. Ultimately, the Peru events suggest that a Project Bluebeam scenario doesn't require a global holographic sky show to be effective. It only requires localized high-tech terror that renders a community incapable of distinguishing between a corporate goon squad and interdimensional invaders. So by the time the world realizes the quote-unquote aliens are wearing jetpacks, the resources have already been extracted and the social structures have already collapsed, proving that the most successful invasion is the one that convinces you the enemy isn't human. The aid and support infrastructure for the villagers of the Loreto region, including the Iquitos community of Alto Nene, is primarily led by indigenous-led federations and international human rights organizations that specialize in protecting territorial integrity against illegal mining and environmental violence. Because the PELACARAS narrative is frequently viewed by local leaders as a mask for illegal extraction and land grabbing, effective aid focuses on territorial defense, legal representation, and boots-on-the-ground humanitarian medical care. Supporters can contribute through these vetted channels to provide the resources necessary for these communities to resist both physical and psychological displacement. These organizations work directly with the communities to secure land titles and provide indigenous defenders with the tools needed to monitor and report illegal incursions. There's, I'm not sure how to say this, ADASEP, the Inter-Ethnic Association for the Development of the Peruvian Rainforest. The primary national spokesperson for Amazonian indigenous peoples in Peru, representing over 1,800 communities. They coordinate legal and political pressure to protect native territories from illegal economies. You have the Rainforest Foundation, U.S., partnered with groups like ADASEP or ORAU to provide satellite monitoring technology and tech camps that empower indigenous women and leaders to document land invasions in real time. You have Amazon Watch, a 501c3 nonprofit that focuses on protecting the rainforest and advancing the rights of indigenous peoples. They provide an Amazon Defenders Fund that channels direct financial support to grassroots leaders facing threats from extractionists or illegal mining operations, land grabbers, land barons, etc. For direct aid to the people of the Iquitos and Nene River basins who suffer from the isolation and lack of infrastructure that makes them vulnerable to PELACARAS hysteria, these organizations provide critical services. You have Amazon Promise, a U.S. nonprofit that provides desperately needed healthcare to 32 remote river villages in northeastern Peru. They partner with local practitioners to offer community health education and medical training, which is vital for these communities experiencing both physiological and psychological trauma. There's the People of Peru Project. This is based in Iquitos. This organization provides humanitarian aid, including medical and dental care, and fights human trafficking and child exploitation in the jungle. Another big sub-theory that goes along with this stuff: organ harvesting, human trafficking, etc. They're currently working to build a state-of-the-art hospital in the heart of the Amazon to serve these impoverished communities. You have Minga Peru, which focuses on social change in the Laredo region by training women as promotoras, community leaders who teach health, self-esteem, and environmental sustainability to rural families. The Amazon Conservation Team, or ACT, works hand-in-hand with indigenous leaders to ensure the long-term welfare of the Amazon, utilizing satellite technology to help establish the presence of isolated groups and trigger legal protections. Supporting indigenous-led advocacy through its Keepers of the Earth Fund, which provides small grants for community development and projects that defend ancestral knowledge. So those are just some of the groups that, if you feel so inclined, if you have the means to do so, please help out any way you can, you know? These are the groups that, from what all I've checked, seem to be the most legitimate, direct ways to help these people. So, once again, this is an ongoing thing. And like I said at the top of the episode, this is still happening. People are still encountering and having violent physical altercations. People are disappearing. And once the whole alien narrative disappeared from behind this, the news cycle just stopped giving a shit. There's certain things that, the way our media works in America specifically, I know everyone is by now totally burnt out on Epstein shit. I know I am. But somebody of consequence, preferably multiple somebodies of consequence, needs to keep talking about it. We cannot let this die. No matter how many fucking wars or alleged alien disclosures, etc., are in the works, we cannot let these stories die. Someone has to keep bringing it up whenever possible, especially when speaking truth to power. So, that's my piece on that. I'm not going to talk about that fucking shit anymore because I nearly had a bad mental reaction. Like, I just so badly want to see something done. But this is an ongoing case in Peru that needs help and attention. And I don't know. This is actually a story that I intend to keep up with on a fairly regular basis because, as I said, this is still unfolding. And there's hardly ever any... There's no follow-up with this kind of stuff. Something amazing and extraordinary happens, and then, you know, we get our quelching narratives like, oh, calm down, it's just, you know, whatever. It's just pirates. It's just air pirates, which in itself is already pretty fucking crazy. But once you have that come in, it quelches people's fascination, or at least the media cycle fascination. And this is something that people need to regularly be checking back in on a continuous basis. So, just putting that out there. That's going to do it for today's episode. My voice is giving out, obviously, so that means it's time to relax, smoke a giant cigar, and drink a quart of milk. I'm just getting over being sick, so that's probably not helping. I want to thank you all for listening. You guys are the best. You're fucking awesome. One of the smartest audiences ever been my distinct pleasure to be involved with. Stay tuned for new episodes. I got some big topics and subjects and investigations coming together. I'm trying to organize another episode with the A-Team, with my old co-hosts. Get us together back again in the studio, quote-unquote studio, for another atomic honky throwdown. Just some laughs, some cut-ups, and all that good stuff. All that jive talking. If you want to contact us, email us at kooksandcranks@gmail.com. KOOKSANDCRANKS@gmail.com. Last episode on the Ambrose Bierce topic. I remember getting a little snippy when I said that he was a man of some goddamn integrity. And I mentioned that because I can't tell you since I started this channel, at least specifically once I started posting episodes on YouTube, how many emails and various groups or individuals have emailed me saying like, hey, if you pay us this amount of money, we'll give you this amount of views or get you this amount of numbers of subscribers, etc. And there are multiple services like this, and I hesitate for quite a while to even mention this, but I mean, whatever. That's your hustle? Fucking do it. But I don't know. I've thought about doing it several times, but I don't know. I feel dirty somewhere down the road. It wouldn't feel so artificial and just, I don't know. The reason I bring it up is because it just shows to you that quote-unquote popular opinions and ideas are all bought and sold and paid for. I don't use social media if I can fucking help it. I just kind of want the material to speak for itself and just a grassroots thing where I can still maintain a sort of, at least the comment sections, etc., a one-on-one channel to you guys. If you ever want to bandy about ideas and discuss stuff, hit me up. I'm down. I try to check everything on a somewhat fairly regular basis. So, yeah, hit up the comments, the likes, the shares, etc. I really appreciate all that stuff. You guys are the best. I will see you on the next one. This has been Kooks, Pranks, and Iconoclasts, a podcast. I am your host, Mike Lucht, and we will meet again in the outer limits of the Twilight Zone. Peace out. Kawabunga.